Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by Trainer Road. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee with our head coach, Chad Zimmerman.
Hi, everybody.
Our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hi, everybody.
And we're ready to answer more of the cycling and triathlon related questions you submitted.
Every time.
Because you're always mimicking me.
It's true, he does.
No, today I wasn't mimicking you.
No?
I was taking your energy and going a step higher.
Nate loves to poke the bear.
One up in me. Okay.
Nate
all the time,
Nate
right?
loves to poke the bear. This is a true fact of Nate. Yep. Nate, let's start off really quick with job postings.
Yep.
Current ones that we have open so that people can apply.
We have a brand new job posting.
We do. You can go to trainerroad.com/jobs to see that.
Okay, so we have a new job posting. It is the product marketing manager, and this person would be responsible pretty much for stuff pre-sign up. This is about taking our marketing content, our website, our blog, forum, all this sort of stuff, and getting it in line and using data to like A/B test, track things to go through, all the way to sign up, increasing funnel. If you're like a data person who's well familiar with Google Analytics, ads, A/B testing things, these are the kind of person that we want. They also will create issues for the marketing team, work with the marketing team to develop campaigns. Marketing team will execute on those. They don't have to like execute all these things, but just get the whole team in alignment and get some of these educational materials that we have out like better, and then look at the data and see which ones hit better, which ones hit worse, what wording's better, what's worse, work the copywriters. So all of that sort of stuff. So it's up today, trainer.com/jobs. We also have React Native engineers still up. We're hiring 4 more of those. I think we've hired 4 already. And then we have a customer support team. If you're local in Reno, we still have about 6 openings for that.
Yep, that's how it works. Now we're going to go straight into something covering from last week when we talked about food allergy versus food sensitivity. I was wrong. I should have done more research before sharing on this one, and I apologize to you guys because usually you count on us to kind of cut through the marketing and find the science behind this, and I just went ahead and I went up and got a test and then shared those results without looking too deeply into
happens.
it.
Every once in a while we step on a landmine. I mean, you can't help it.
So we both looked at the test we specifically recommended was the Everly food sensitivity test. Jonathan and I both looked at it. We both bought it. We just wanted to believe. And then we, luckily, you users, awesome, immediately sent us some messages. We looked at the research and we like evidence-based stuff here, and the evidence is not to our level of like threshold that we want. So
That's a good way to put it.
Yep. I'm very sorry for doing that. Like Jonathan said, usually you can look to us to do the research to see what the evidence is, but we failed on this time.
Yeah, and I didn't utilize it, nor did I endorse it. Much like raw dairy, I simply expressed an interest. It's a personal interest. And you know, when I vet it as thoroughly as I think I vetted this, I'm probably going to keep those findings myself. But the fact is, it's not something I'm just going to do because it's interesting. I'm going to look into it, and that's it.
Sure. Yeah.
So we'll talk about raw milk in a little bit too.
Yeah.
But anyways, what we thought we'd do then is have Chad talk about just food allergy versus food sensitivity and kind of
In general.
In general, yes, without mentioning, we don't want to get sued by anybody.
Yeah, we're not looking to badmouth anybody.
Yep.
Just inform.
Okay.
So can you run us through kind of, I guess, really it's IgG versus...
IgE versus IgG, immune-mediated responses. But before we get to that, in order to explain what those things are, I want to give, first off, a 10,000-foot view of the immune system.
Cool.
And I've kind of talked immunity before, and I described it as it was what it is there's two halves, if you will, to the immune system. There's the innate system and the adaptive system. And basically, it's your first line of defense, and then that line of defense recruits a more specific response. And that's the adaptive immune system, which is even sometimes referred to as a specific immune system. So it's a more specific response. And it's also one that actually learns from previous insults. And those insults are pathogens, which, put simply, is germs. So think of bacteria, viri, which is the plural of virus, just learn that, and fungus, things like that. Anything that infects the body. Each of these things contain unique molecules called antigens. And antigens elicit an immune response from the adaptive immune system I just mentioned. The response is antibodies, and these antibodies bind the antigens so that they can't bind to the host, us. Another word for antibodies is immunoglobulins. So immunoglobulin G, immunoglobulin E, there are 3 others, there's 5 total. E and G are the ones we're going to focus on because they're the ones that are relevant to food, adverse food reactions. And just to sum that up, then the innate system responds initially, the adaptive system follows up and finishes the job, does some learning in the process. Now, I also want to give a 100,000-foot view of our immune system, which is essentially, it differentiates between the self and the non-self. And I think this important, even simpler definition, I have two reasons behind it, because it explains a couple areas where the immune system breaks down. One is an autoimmune reaction, where the immune system sees self as non-self and it attacks it. That's the very essence of autoimmune disorders.
Terrible.
Yep. Yeah. And then cancer is where the immune system sees non-self as self, and it doesn't attack it, and it allows cancer cells to proliferate. And
also terrible.
That's basically the basis of cancer, or the gist of cancer. Okay, so with that in mind, move on to adverse food reactions, and this is just basically the catch-all term for everything on the spectrum between food allergies to food sensitivities.
Got it.
Let's do it.
Okay, so to complicate this just a little bit, so we got, like I said, food allergies on one end, food sensitivities on the other end. Sometimes food allergies are referred to as food hypersensitivities. So if you see the term hypersensitivity, they're probably talking about an allergy, not a simple sensitivity.
Got it.
Let's just get that out of the way. Okay, so the reactions to food allergies are immediate, they're reproducible. Think of things like swelling of mucous membranes. And mucous membranes, basically any bodily opening. So your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth, your gut, which is technically an opening. Difficulty breathing, rash, itching skin, even anaphylactic shock, which is what makes allergies actually life-threatening.
That's like when people get stung by a bee and they really need something like an EpiPen, that sort of thing.
And these food allergies elicit an IgE-mediated immune response. So those two immunoglobulins I just mentioned, this is the E one. This is the more serious one. And these need to be tested for individually. So no single drop of blood is going to cut it. It's a more extensive process than that. And to differentiate allergies from sensitivities, allergies don't leave you wondering if you're allergic. Like you just mentioned, if you have a peanut allergy,
you figure that one out.
Yeah, seriously, you get stung by a bee, you know whether or not you're allergic.
Yeah, or if you eat peanuts or milk, you can,
or fish, or whatever it may be.
There's a difference between discomfort and then that true allergy. Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So, which brings us to food sensitivities, often referred to as intolerances. So, food intolerances. Reactions here, less serious, often limited to the GI tract. Not exclusively, but most of the time. Body simply doesn't process or digest foods normally. Stated another way, these are adverse food reactions with no antigen-antibody response. Okay. And it's not exactly correct, which I'm going to get to.
An example of that. Do you mind if we...
No, jump in.
Okay, please. Good. Because everyone's going to say, no, you interrupted. But you asked me to, off camera. Jonathan and I are both lactose intolerant.
Yeah, although I've never been tested and shown you were lactose intolerant.
So I don't know, a doctor in the 80s told me this. There was no test, but the test is you give me a glass of milk, I will clear a room.
Yeah,
right?
It's not good.
Lactose is I have a few things to say on lactose, both in this topic and another question we have.
What will happen for people that are lactose intolerant? You get gas, discomfort, diarrhea. Can I give TMI? No, I won't.
No. Please don't.
Please definitely don't.
Okay. Anyways, that was going to be an example, but we're not going to die from eating lactose.
Yeah,
correct.
Like we're not going to stop breathing.
That is actually my very next point. Typically, not life-threatening.
Yep.
Okay. Food sensitivities and intolerances are not life-threatening.
Be extremely
In fact,
uncomfortable.
I don't know if there's a situation where they are life-threatening. Probably is, but I don't know what it is. So these are termed in some circles IgG-mediated, because they elicit an IgG response. And they actually do. The antibody is present when you eat these things that you are sensitive or intolerant to. But why you're getting that IgG response may not be because you're intolerant of the food so much as your system has developed a tolerance for it. And this IgG is something that comes along with it.
So it could go both ways, kind of.
I don't know if it's both ways or if it's just that way, but there's enough science to support that it definitely, you can get an IgG response from something that is now something you can tolerate.
So you might just be, instead of having a sensitivity, it just might mean you're eating that food.
And your body tolerates it.
Yep. You had it once before, your body recognizes it. These IgG, these particular immunoglobulins are released, and it doesn't necessarily mean bad things.
Yeah, it's more like it's toleration rather than, or it's tolerance rather than actually.
Instead of intolerance. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, so.
Yep.
Okay, so examples of food sensitivities, like we just talked about lactose intolerance, and this is just an enzyme deficiency, right? You don't have enough lactate in the system, so the lactose basically ferments in your gut, doesn't digest. This is non-immune mediated. Fructose intolerance, similar. Enzyme deficiency, you can't break down fructose, non-immune mediated. Preservatives and additives, the things that leads to brain fog, headaches, fatigue, that's a form of intolerance as well. And just to be clear, food sensitivities are very real. It's diagnosing them that's the difficult part. Certain services contend there's an immune response to food sensitivities. Their stance is that allergies are IgE mediated, whereas sensitivities are IgG mediated. But as we just said, that there is an IgG response doesn't necessarily mean there's an intolerance. Could actually indicate a tolerance. And this is how they claim to use blood to test for these sensitivities. Science, on the other hand, says some other things. Dr. Sheila Crow, she's an MD. She's the president of the American Gastroenterologists Association. I'm pretty sure that's what that acronym stands for. She's also a gastroenterology professor at UCSD. She's got about 100 acronyms behind her name. Woman knows her stuff. She describes food sensitivities as either physiological, pharmacological, or psychological, not immunological. IgG, in her opinion, and her well-informed opinion, is overly tested, sometimes to the point of malnutrition. Sometimes it rules out so many things that we can actually push people into a state of malnutrition because they're missing out on so many necessary micronutrients, phytonutrients. Their macros get shifted in unhealthy ways, et cetera.
It's the hard part of any diet, right? If a restrictive diet is, it's just hard to get everything else that comes with the food that you might get.
Furthermore, she refers to food sensitivity and IgG testing as voodoo allergy testing. And she's far from alone. There's numerous reputable organizations in the United States, in Canada, in Europe that actually recommend against IgG testing to diagnose food sensitivities.
One thing, too, you said about this is psychological. Back maybe 10 years ago, man, there were a lot of people that were gluten intolerant, right? And they've done...
It's faded a bit. We've all gotten better. That's what's happened.
Gluten's an interesting one, too.
They've done... Because there's celiac, which is like...
That affects about 5% of the population, or 5, maybe it might
legit
even be 5% of the people with food sensitivities. I'm not sure. It's a small...
You can get a test of celiac. And then there's people who say, when I eat this food, I feel run down, runny nose, that sort of
I
stuff.
have one of the alleles that says I am prone to celiac.
I have a genetic test that says I'm prone to it, but I'm fine. What I'm just saying is I've seen studies where they do like double-blind tests where they give people, some people gluten, some people not. No, neither people know. And the people who also, if they tell someone that they're giving you gluten, they feel worse when they actually aren't giving gluten. It's huge, right?
That's real.
And when you hear, especially, like, was it 10 years ago or 5 years ago? It was everywhere, right? Like, we have these trends about stuff, and everyone is just like, oh man, I can't eat gluten or else I'm going to feel tired. And you get this association.
It's a bandwagon effect.
That happens, So, which is so hard to break, right? But you should be aware of it. And that's the first step.
Saturated fat's bad for you. We're still wrestling with that. How many people still wrestle with that, even though there's so much science to support that it's not as simple as that.
Yeah, exactly. More complex, right?
Okay, so let me share just one study.
Please,
and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but Oliver Burton et al. In 2019, they looked at the utility of IgG bodies in anti-IgE therapy. So this is kind of what we were just talking about, and they demonstrated that higher levels of a particular immunoglobulin G, so an IgG, it was IgG4. With certain foods may indicate a tolerance to those foods, not a sensitivity. So this is just further an actual study that backs up what we just said. And then let me just a couple of little factotums or things I want to tie in before we get to how we should actually address sensitivities.
Cool.
Testing has to target a single potential allergen using a specific IgE test. Okay, got to make it specific. And this is typically a skin or a blood test. Even then, though, IgE-linked diagnoses might not equal clinical allergies. So it's not because it elicited an IgE response, that there's definitely an allergy there. And then everything I found really said testing IgG response to multiple foods at once is probably an indication that what you're paying for might not be reliable.
There we go.
To put it as diplomatically as possible.
To step back, so you've heard me on this podcast probably talk about my IgG3 subclass that is deficient or low. There's 4 IgG subclasses, 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 is the one for upper respiratory infections. And when I get sick a lot, I get sinus infections, and I test the 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, and 4 are right in the recommended the range. And then 3 is either right below the range or right at the range. And this is why I went to the Mayo Clinic. They can give you infusions to like replace IgG3 in your body, but it's like $40,000 a year. Ooh. And because I'm right on the line, like I don't know if it's insurance at all, but I go right there. It can also lead to like stroke and stuff. That it's not a good thing. And even too, what my immunologist told me is even if you have low IgG3, the rest of your immune system compensates. So just because you have one low IgG, this is what my doctor told me personally, doesn't necessarily mean that you can't overcome these things.
Got it.
Okay.
Basically, what they're trying to do right now is just fix it structurally by like putting balloons in my sinuses. You can hear my voice right now. I have a sinus infection at the moment. Increase my sinuses and clear it out so that things don't pool, and maybe then that the amount of IgG3 in me and my rest of my immune system will take that over.
Gotcha.
So
let's move into let's take a break from allergy really quick, and let's talk about on the fat burning side of things. So we talked about this a bit last week, and we've talked about it plenty of other times too. But Chad, for those that don't know, you're always studying different things. We always are here at Trainer Road, but you especially, Chad. And you came across a quote that we loved that's really talking about the fat burning side of things, kind of adding on to what we talked about last week. Do you want to share that quote, Chad?
Yeah, I just happened to come across something that tidily summed up what we basically just said. It's a quote from Brad Schoenfeld. If you're in the strength training realm at all, you've for sure heard of Brad at some point.
Yep.
I can't remember what the name of his website is, but it's cleverly named Look Good Naked or something like that. Substrate utilization is governed by a host of factors, i.e. hormonal secretions, enzyme activity, transcription factors, etc. And these factors can change by the moment. Thus, fat burning must be considered over the course of days, not on an hour-to-hour basis, to get a meaningful perspective on its impact on body composition. As a general rule, if you burn more carbohydrate during a workout, you inevitably burn more fat in the post-exercise period, and vice versa.
This is a really interesting quote because a lot of the time, and like if you go to a normal gym, like just an average fitness center, you'll see a lot of people that just like try to keep the cardio low. And a lot of the time, they'll talk to them and they're like, I'm in the zone.
Graph on the wall.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm in the zone and I don't want to get out of that because as soon as I get out of that, I don't burn fat.
There's a lot wrong with that.
The whole exercise is void for them. But this is the interesting thing that really talks about the fact that, do the work that you're doing, and even high intensity work is really beneficial in this regard.
A lot of regards.
And it's not like once you hit end workout that at that point your body stops burning fat. And when you do this high intensity work like this, it's burning fat around the clock over time thereafter the workout. It's still utilizing that.
There's a definite post-exercise effect.
Yep, exactly. And there have been many studies, and I'm sure we can link to some in the forum if you look up episode 233, but there have been many studies that have shown that high intensity exercise still burns fat. It's not like it just turns off that system. I think that's fair to say. Yep. So,
and then actually I didn't get a chance to wrap up. I do want to offer some takeaways.
Sure, please.
As far as what we can do regarding food allergies and food sensitivities, how we can actually address it.
Cool.
As far as specific allergies, you got to work with an allergist or a dermatologist. I'm sure there are other types of doctors, functional health, or I'm not sure what they're, functional medicine, physicians, immunologists, rheumatists, depending on how you're being affected. In the case of less specific sensitivities, registered dietitian is a good place to go, especially if it's one that thoroughly vets your family allergy and autoimmune history. So it shouldn't be totally simplistic. I'm sure there are some RDs who aren't great, but it's a registered dietitian. I mean, it's about the highest form of education you can get when it comes to dietary advice. For a more DIY approach, do-it-yourself approach, basically eliminate anything suspect. If you think you might be reactant to wheat, take wheat out of your diet for a while. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. If you want to get a bit more comprehensive about it, then you have to go the elimination trial or elimination diet route. And there are a number of ways to do it. And I'm just going to throw some names out there so that you can look into these if this is interesting to you. But basically, actually, before I get to those, just take a month and eliminate processed foods, sugar, and emphasize nutrient density if you want to keep it as simplistic as possible. That right there, if that doesn't make you feel better, then something is more severely wrong. A low FODMAP diet. If you're not familiar with FODMAPs, it's fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols, which is basically just short chain carbohydrates, so simple sugars. And then the polyols are artificial sweeteners. So think like xylitol and sorbitol. Get these things out of your diet. Try going low lactose, low fructose, low starch and sugars, low gluten, all of which is covered with a low FODMAP diet. To take it a step further, you can go paleo. And I'm not endorsing the paleo diet. I'm not saying it's the way to live. I am saying it's a heck of an elimination diet because there's just not a lot to it.
Yeah. So you'll
And it
eliminate
eliminates
a lot.
all the obvious hitters. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
A regular elimination diet might start you with just brown rice and chicken for a couple weeks.
It can go way down, yeah.
And it's like, and then you put in one food at a time.
And that's exactly it. There's
taxing.
another Terry Walls. Yes. If you don't know Terry Walls' story, look her up on YouTube. It's a fascinating story. But she has something called the Walls Protocol, and it's along these very same lines, low FODMAP, paleo-ish. But the idea is that you feel well, your GI issues resolve, good energy, mental clarity, all the things that go with just feeling good. And then you start to gradually factor things back into your diet. And it has to be incremental. It has to be methodological. It has to be incremental. I already said that. But you have to be careful with it. It's a potentially long trial and error process because you have to put something back in long enough to see if, in fact, it does elicit an undesirable reaction.
As taxing as it is, though, it is fair to say, I mean, if you are experiencing extreme discomfort and you don't know what the source is, then, it may very well be worth it. So.
Yeah, and like gluten is a really good example of how we want to pin an issue on simple wheat tolerance, and typically it comes down to gluten, which is the protein in the wheat, but there's also fructans in wheat, which is sugar. There are lectins in wheat, which is a protective mechanism.
It's so hard to add things in.
So it may not simply be a wheat intolerance. It may be something a little more specific, which is going to be even more work to determine. But the fact is, it may not be quite so straightforward.
Food's hardly ever straightforward, right?
Ever.
There's a lot involved.
Well, with
It's quite a
my
large topic.
sinus stuff again, people, I eliminated dairy for 4 months. A lot of people said, hey, it was probably dairy. You're getting that could do it. I went to the Mayo Clinic after that. I had sinus infections during that time. Yeah. And my IgG did not change at all during that time. So both.
But now you know.
Now I know. It's nice, though, to be able to do it because now I know that dairy, and I eat a small amount of dairy, just because you'll have some bread and we'll have a little bit of butter in it, right?
Sure.
It's annoying to go dairy free, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for everyone who does
It's
that.
not just no milk.
Yeah, right. Like everything has dairy, like a little bit. And
Yes.
you'll look whey protein, whey concentrate, like as the 12th ingredient on something. You're like, I can't eat that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's another. It's a good point though. If you do an elimination diet, you have to really be specific and don't eat out.
Yeah.
Because they a lot of times too, you talk to
It's impossible.
like the waiter, you're like, does that have dairy? And they're like,
I don't
Steve, does
know.
that have dairy in it? I don't know. Like nobody knows.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just too hard to control. Staying in the vein of nutrition here, let's go into a question here from Martin. It says, my wife is lactose intolerant, which makes me lactose free when it comes to cooking and meal times. I know that milk can be a good pre and post workout drink. That's his assumption there that he says.
I don't know about the pre.
Milk could be a bad choice, right?
Post,
Yeah, yeah.
post, prep, or post. Not
Yeah. I've never. Well, that actually. I think it was.
Did someone do it during an Ironman?
Yeah. I think it was.
That's a tough lesson to learn.
Cam Worth, for years, we heard, Cam, this could be untrue, so let us know if it's not. But we heard that you continued throughout your cycling career and everything else that you used chocolate milk on the bike, not just just after. And I can't imagine. I mean, I don't know if he did this at Kona, but I can't imagine the heat at Kona. And drinking
hot chocolate.
oh my gosh, it makes me sick thinking of that. But anyways, it's fair to say that it is known as a good post-workout drink, due to its basically the 4-to-1 ratio that you usually seek out in a recovery drink, and like chocolate milk, it gets close.
The carbs to protein ratio, yeah.
Yep, it gets close to emulating that. So. He says, but am I missing other nutritional benefits by avoiding lactose, or I guess in this case, by avoiding milk, really?
Yeah. So,
Let's jump in.
Well, Martin can still be drinking milk and have lactose free. There's
Sure.
lactose free milk.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, of course.
Yep. Okay, so first, being as specific as lactose, I just want to say it's just one of many sugars. So there's no harm in avoiding lactose. And frankly, a lot of people don't tolerate lactose very well. 3 million cases a year of lactose intolerance are diagnosed. And it can be argued that sometimes it's the lactose, sometimes it's the processing that takes place with the milk. This is why my interest in raw milk, not an endorsement, just an interest.
I'm going to restate that really quick.
Yeah.
We are not endorsing raw milk. It can be dangerous to your health.
Yeah.
That's it.
Especially, and for certain populations, it can kill you.
Sure. Oh, yeah, it can be very dangerous.
Yep.
And also don't confuse milk or lactose intolerance with a milk allergy, because the allergy is obviously more severe, as we just covered, and it's typically tied to the proteins in milk. Okay, so a lot of beneficial components of dairy, but a lot of substitutes for all those things. So I'm going to run down what is considered to be beneficial in milk or dairy products, and where you can find alternate substitutes for those.
Sweet. It's like a guide.
Yep.
Cool.
So first off, and probably most obviously, is calcium. A lot of ways to replace your calcium intake. Seeds are really good. Chia, poppy, sesame, celery. Canned fish like sardines and salmon, because you can actually eat the bones in them. So a lot of calcium in bones. Beans and lentils, winged beans, which I didn't know was another term for goa beans, white beans, nuts, in particular almonds, and then milk protein. You know, you can have whey protein that's lactose free and contains calcium. Leafy greens, I think pretty much everyone's clear on this, but collard greens, spinach, kale, all contain certain amounts of calcium. And then random things like rhubarb, figs, edamame, amaranth, lots of sources of calcium. So a quick internet search and you'll have plenty of ways to cover that base. As far as the post-workout, carbohydrate protein composition, you can use a whey shake with an alternate sugar source, something that isn't lactose. Lactose is roughly 5% of the sugar content in milk, or the caloric content in milk, whereas chocolate milk is like 25 grams. I mean, they really jack up the sugar in chocolate milk, but it doesn't come from lactose. It's
delicious.
Typically something else.
Yeah.
Essential amino acids, milk has all of them. So does meat, poultry, seafood. Eggs, soy, quinoa, buckwheat. So if you're concerned with getting your EAAs, there are a lot of ways to do that. Vitamins, B vitamins, milk and B vitamins go hand in hand. Also vitamin C, all the fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. Eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. It's really that simple. You don't even have to get too granular with it. Just make sure you have 3, 4, 5 servings of vegetables, fruits or vegetables, preferably vegetables in your diet daily, and you'll cover that base as well.
Now I'm going to go on a limb here. This may be controversial, but Trainer Road endorses eating high amounts of fruits and vegetables.
We should run that by our lawyers first, but I think that's okay.
Well, anything in nutrition, someone's going to be like, hey, fruit's going to make you fat. There's too much fructose in it. I guarantee you.
Guaranteed forum explosion. It's going to happen.
I know, but I don't.
That match.
There are some people.
He's just lighting it up right
Okay,
now.
there are some people who are going to be like, oh, you can't eat nightshades or something. Like, they will. I guarantee you.
I'm seeing, you're just pouring gas
But
right now.
I'm going to be very brave and say that we say eat lots of fruits and vegetables, especially as an endurance athlete. It's going to make you performance well and good health.
Yes.
Yep. Perform well and good health.
Okay, milk also contains trace minerals. Again, vegetables.
Yep.
Fruits, whatever. Okay, and then the last thing, and this one we dove into a little bit because Nate put it on my radar, it's CLA. So it's conjugated linoleic acid. I didn't realize that's what linoleic acid was. It's just a different form of it. So knew about it, didn't know much detail about it. I do now. So it's a fatty acid, found mostly in plant oils. It is an omega-6, but there are certain anti-inflammatory aspects of it that make it behave a little more like an omega-3. This doesn't fly in the face of recommendations to maintain, and they vary your omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of 4-to-1, 2-to-1, 1-to-1, depending on who you're listening to and who you give your attention to. There are a few different opinions on it. But in any case, you should heavily favor your or greatly reduce your intake of omega-6s relative to
omega-3
your 3s in terms of an American diet. We're terrible about that.
We talked about supplements before, and that was the one that I forgot, omega-3.
Yeah.
Like fish oil supplement. That is one that I take every day, and I think that's another one we can recommend.
Yeah, exactly.
Seriously? Okay. Okay. I'm not saying
just sprinkling.
I'm not saying anything.
You turned on the sprinkler. It's going like crazy.
CLA is found mostly in meat and dairy from ruminant animals. So ruminant animals, multi-stomach, these are animals that can actually process grasses, things that we can't. Things that the fiber we can't digest, they can because they have numerous stomachs.
Can you imagine, Nate, if you had numerous stomachs, how much Nate would eat if he had more than one? It'd be amazing.
Just watch Nate chewing his cud throughout the podcast. Not so into that. Okay, so let's get to the claims, the CLA claims, a lot of them. Builds muscle, burns fat, anti-inflammatory, anti-carcinogenic, immunity enhancing, reduces risk of diabetes, increases sensitivity to insulin, lowers blood sugar, improves calcium absorption and therefore bone density. A lot of things, and there's actually a fair amount of science to back these things up. So in terms of its fat-burning capabilities, an obesity review, or a journal called the Obesity Review, the British Journal of Nutrition, but they both back that up. But there was a meta-analysis by the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that gave it inconsistent results. So at worst, inconsistent. In terms of enhancing the immune system, that same American Journal of Clinical Nutrition did back that up in one way or another. University of Massachusetts did a review, Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry as well. They all support that. And then the anti-carcinogenic, they're just random publications. I mean, you just get on PubMed, you'll find a lot of things that point to anti-carcinogenic aspects of conjugated linoleic acid. And then in terms of the diabetes, that actually kind of goes the other way. So that most of the research I found on that said quite the opposite, that it's not favorable in terms of reducing your likelihood of diabetes. And then calcium absorption and bone density, Journal of Cell Physiology had some strong support for that.
Interesting. So CLA verdict?
So far, so good. There, in terms of endurance benefit, most of the studies I found were done in mice. And I know you can't directly extrapolate animal studies to human studies, but it does inspire research. It makes us think, well, we share a lot of our genomic or a lot of our genotype with mice, so let's do this. So they have done certain human trials. 2015, they did a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized controlled trial, 8 weeks, 80 non-trained young male students. In terms of lipid effect, there was no significant effect on VO2 max, time to exhaustion, BMI, weight, but it did increase fat burning. So there is support.
It's a great time to be a mouse.
Yeah.
They cured everything.
But like I said, they steer
supplement
us in particular directions. They make us recognize which areas might be worth further interest in actual research.
Of course.
That same journal, don't even remember which one it was, said a 2012 study, enhanced endurance capacity due to increased fatty acid oxidation. So, I mean, you just burn more fat. CLA helps you burn more fat, which means helps you spare a bit of glycogen, right? You're just shifting fuel sources. Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research did a 6-week study, backed this up as well. And then all these were supplementary studies. So they have to supplement it to measure it. So we're not talking what you would just get dietarily, through dairy intake or, alternate.
They're isolating it and somehow ingesting
Take a pill.
Yeah, exactly. So keep that in mind. And then also there was a 2013 PLOS-ONE study that linked CLA to plus endurance exercise to increased testosterone biosynthesis. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And PLOS-ONE also noted that when you combine creatine with CLA, they saw improved strength and body composition in men and women over the age of 65, so older adults.
More than just creatine, because creatine
Who knows?
does that.
Exactly.
Okay.
So worth looking into.
So CLA, it's in milk.
It's in dairy, basically,
Sure.
but there are
Yeah, where else can we get it, I guess is the point.
basically grass-fed meats, really. And if you can't tolerate dairy, then grass-fed dairy too. But that grass-fed is a big deal. You can't feed them grains and expect to get these CLA benefits.
Or you can buy a pill. Too. That's
Apparently.
like in these studies, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, no doubt. And it's also
It
worth
doesn't
saying,
appear to be harmful either. Nothing I came across.
right, when we focus in on one component of something that's contained within a food source or something like that, it's not as if that one component only resides there and it can't be found in other foods. And that's like an important thing for people to,
And it's
because
not
like
to say-
if you did this, like I sometimes I think about like the cyclist that doesn't look deep into it, but they heard that like tart cherry juice, and they heard that like red meat has this one benefit, and they heard that a leaf from some rainforest has this, and then they're just like taking it all in, right? And it's the fact is all of our food, if it's a natural food source, it's going to have a whole variety of many different things that we can take in. And really, we're just looking into individual components. It doesn't mean that these are like, this is your missing link from you going to
you
6 watts per kilo.
You can't weed out
right?
a single, magic pill and expect it to have some
Right.
incredible performance on.
This is all steroids, EPO, HGH.
I mean, they come
there are
with
some
certain-
magic pills
legally
out
come
there.
with some certain
and
doses.
they are banned in competition.
Legally.
But yeah, there are
Maybe
magic
let's
pills
say
out there.
legally then.
And injections, yeah.
Yeah,
There's
keeping
no,
it
as far as the only magic,
legal.
water,
Yeah.
carbohydrates, those are like the magic pills.
Bread and water, right? That's what they say.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So Chad, thank you for giving us all the alternatives. That's cool.
So a lot of good stuff in dairy, but a lot of ways to get those very same things in other foods.
Yeah, awesome. Let's go into Mike's question. He says, hey guys, love the podcast, which Mike's question, by the way, represents a question from a lot of people. We got a flood of questions last week after talking about rollers. He says, love the podcast. I just got into cycling this past spring and recently subscribed to Trainer Road for some off-season training using a cheap old set of rollers that I borrowed from a friend. Awesome. Good to hear, Mike. And just a pro tip, if you train with us in the off-season, you'll be fast in the off-season. And then if you don't train with us in your race season, you're probably not going to be as fast. So you can train with us year-round. I recommend it. So we hear all the time, right? Like everyone's like, I was super fast, and then I started racing, and I quit training inside, and I quit, following structured workouts, and now I'm not as fast. So That's like if we had a dime, right, for each one of those.
There's a lesson there.
Yep, for sure. But he says, I'm a few workouts into Chad's Sweet Spot Base program, and I'm loving the rollers during the work intervals, but I can't seem to stay upright during the slower sections, anything below 110 watts, which that's like recovery intervals, that sort of thing.
That's understandable.
He says, I'm curious if you have any input. So he says, is this just inherent to rollers, and should I give up on them until I can bump up my FTP where this isn't an issue? Would investing in a better set of rollers help? Or is my technique really just that bad and I need to keep working at it? I think the first thing that I'd like to cover on this one is, would investing in a better set of rollers help? And I've ridden a lot of different sets of rollers. I've ridden the Inside Ride rollers. I've ridden the Elite Quick Motion ones. Tax has some rollers. I even rode those rollers that have like a strange pyramidal like shape to them. So like it actually kind of domes up in the center, and you think it's the opposite of what you would want, but for something I'll explain in a little bit, it actually helps keep you in the center. And that's the only thing that I've ridden where I'm like, oh wow, this makes a difference. The booms do make a difference when the whole thing can slide, but it doesn't take away the complexity of riding rollers. It's 100% present. So I don't think that a better set of rollers would help in this regard in terms of staying balanced at a low pace. It's just always really hard. And it's funny because the first time that we think, like when you ride rollers, you have in your mind, like if I'm pedaling at 25 miles an hour, my wheels are spinning like that, and I fall off these rollers, my bike is going to instantly accelerate to 25 miles an hour, and I'm going to put like a Looney Tunes hole through the wall, right? Like,
no, it doesn't work that way at all.
No, it doesn't work that way. In fact, the funny thing is when you do that, because eventually it will happen, your wheels will come off and you'll land and your bike doesn't go anywhere.
Dead stop.
So then if you do fall, it's because you aren't going anywhere and you just tip over.
You'd have to keep pedaling.
Exactly.
So
the wheels stop instantly.
It'd be like, let's say you are doing 300 watts and then you suddenly has your bike on the ground. It'd be like going from a dead stop at 300 watts.
Yes.
Because you're not actually moving, like your wheels are spinning. It's not going to just suddenly catch.
The rest of you doesn't have mass, right? Your wheels are the only thing that is, or I should say a momentum moving forward.
Exactly, yeah.
Your wheels are the only thing that are spinning, and it takes surprisingly little force to stop those instantly, like you going on to just normal.
And if you stop pedaling, you're not going to go forward.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think that a better set of rollers would help. I did want to explain a couple things with rollers, though, because it is not like riding outside at all. It's like we talked about last week, it's more akin to riding with no hands. And the reason for that is because your bike isn't on one solid, continuous piece of earth. So like when you are riding on the ground, it's not like you can somehow decouple what your front tire is on from the rear tire, right? It's all one piece, unless you're riding on dirt and then things are a little bit different. But on the road, it's all one piece. So as a result, what your front end is doing and your rear end is doing, it's all connected by the road that it's on. But on rollers, there is no connection. Even though there's a little belt there, traction isn't guaranteed on the rollers. And then also that belt can slip very easily and does. So as a result, your front wheel just does whatever it wants compared to your back wheel. And the thing that kind of breaks people's brains with rollers, it's akin to if you've ever seen on YouTube the backwards bike videos when people ride the bike where they turn the handlebars left and then the wheel goes right. And like people that otherwise know how to ride bicycles suddenly don't know how to ride bikes. Well, the same thing happens on rollers. So if you are riding on the rollers and then you turn left, your front end is going to go away from you to the right. So it's going to drift away in the opposite direction. So a lot of the time we'll feel like we're off balance, so we'll naturally correct. And then when you correct, your front end does the opposite of what you want. So it's really hard, and that's why we just feel completely shaken and unstable.
Why do you ride rollers?
Yeah, and this is why it's not like riding on the road. It's just really not, right? But the thing, so you get used to that pretty quickly, and you end up really just controlling your bike entirely with your hips, your trunk. Everything else has to be really strong and stable, and it'll really help you pinpoint deficiencies in your form, like a flaring out knee or a person that bobs a lot with their body. You can get away with bobbing on the rollers, but if you try to up intensity or anything else like that, it's going to bite you eventually.
Yeah, and it's really good at helping you recognize where your balance is derived from. Where it's derived, it's your hips.
100%.
Yeah.
And you're very light on your hands too on the rollers, and it develops a riding style or refines your riding style in a very positive way. So I think it's really helpful. Also, the feel is very good, at least with the Elite Quick Motions. With cheaper rollers, they don't feel great. There's like no real mass behind it, and it feels like you're just spinning. And there's really, as soon as you stop spinning, everything stops. But also when you accelerate, it feels like you're accelerating on air. So that's not very good. Even if you have magnetic resistance, sometimes it doesn't feel good. But those elite quick motions feel fantastic, and they feel akin to riding with a slight tailwind. That's basically what it feels like. But you can still get a lot of resistance in that. So, but the temptation for everybody, because they're afraid they're going to blow through the wall, is to start in a low gear because they don't want to go fast. And it is so much harder to do that because you lack tension in your body. So when you have tension through your legs and everything else, and this goes for riding in an aero position when you're outside too. Try riding in your aero position in your granny gear. It's so hard. But then try riding in it when you have a bunch of force to press against and suddenly everything stabilizes. And that's because you are providing really torque and tension all the way throughout your body, kind of like the sprint video we talked about. You can go on YouTube and check out our sprint video that we did on that. So on rollers, start out in a big gear, big chain ring, and even you don't have to throw it into the smallest cog, but somewhere in the middle, and it's going to help you. It's going to be a lot easier, and you won't fly off. You don't have to worry about it. My biggest tip, though, for rollers is put a rug down on the floor if you're on a hard surface, or put something like carpet, because the only way you'll really crash is if you unclip and your foot slips, right? And then you'll fall over. But otherwise, you won't crash because you'll just pop right off, and then and if you're brand new at cycling, maybe you're not good at clipping out, so that's one thing. But if you are proficient at clipping out, as soon as you pop off, your foot will be out. And then if you land on a rug with that slippery road shoe, you aren't going to slide all over the place.
That's a big deal.
What if you start in a doorway? I've seen that.
Yeah, the best spot.
Yeah, that's our go-to recommendation for learning rollers is to be in a doorway. Because if you put yourself up against a wall, you're going to be terrified of falling
the other
direction.
way.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, it won't assist.
And you can shoulder. So depending on the door jam and depending on your size, if you're large like Chad, then you may be able to just shoulder off of that, right? Sorry, Chad. He loves it when I do that. You can shoulder off that, guys. Right? Stop. But you can shoulder against that doorway, which can be really helpful. Just like if you've ridden in a pack and it happens, you have to shoulder off of people sometimes, not like slam into them.
And just
but
knowing that you have that doorway around you can help you stay relaxed too. And staying relaxed is a big deal when it comes to learning rollers. Just riding rollers.
Just make sure you align your shoulders with the door jam rather than aligning your waist or aligning your handlebar, something like that. Align your shoulders with it. It's a better tip there for sure. One thing about the boom designs, the fore and aft motion is actually the biggest problem with rollers. Like your bike wants to shift forward off of them since it isn't held in place, or shift backward depending on what you're doing with your body. So if you're standing on rollers, when you stand up out of the saddle, it really shows a lot of inefficiencies, and that's where we all usually kind of get away with a lot of bad technique when we stand, because we just throw our weight around on the bike. And when you stand on rollers, it forces you to change that a lot. The result that you'll see out on the road is smooth transitions in and out of the saddle, extremely smooth, because otherwise you pop off your rollers. So the boom designs do help with the fore and aft part. That part they do help with. So that's kind of one thing. Last little bits of information. Don't look down, look out. Like put trainer road in front of you, so then you can be looking at something in front of you. You can look at your head unit, but I promise you it'll be tougher, because at that point you're going to be able to see your like front wheel and your peripheral vision, and you're going to panic about that all the time. It's just like if you're trying to ride on a white line and you're like trying really hard and looking right at your wheels. But then think about it. If you go and ride single track on a mountain bike, you ride on a really narrow line for a long time and everything's okay, right? Well, for some.
Usually.
Yeah. So it's basically when we focus on something right in front of our wheel, we're always going to be making small minor corrections.
Yeah.
And exactly right. So look out, that will really help. And also, at first, I know this sounds silly, but riding in front of a symmetrical surface will really help. And what I mean by that is like the wall. Like if you're riding and a window is slightly offset, it's funny how many times you'll find yourself trying to like center your vision on that and riding toward the edge. It's a little detail, but I've noticed it.
Here's another tip though. Even if you have a trainer, a regular trainer, if you have a desk, you got to set that thing up perfectly perpendicular.
Yes.
Because if it's a little bit off, I find that like I start turning my hips.
Yeah.
Like I turn my handlebars and like my whole body starts to like shift to be perfectly straight.
I've noticed that with my fan. If it's just a little askew, it messes with me.
Yeah, for those who make trainer mats, I would love it if you would put like lines to line us up.
Grid lines.
Yeah, grid lines.
Yeah.
Like for a Wahoo desk, for the desk and for it, like just put grid lines the whole way up.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. And to get things in the right position.
Yeah. It's a small thing, but it does make a difference when you're spending a ton of time on there.
Yep. You just do it on one side. Because you can always flip it over if you don't like the grid lines. But I think everyone's going to like the grid lines.
Yeah.
No, that's a good idea.
So last little bit.
Full of them.
Last little bit, being the roller guy, I really do think that more people should give them a shot. They do feel awkward and scary at first, because it kind of breaks the brain.
It does.
But
they're
then
pretty fun.
Then once you get used to it, there are a lot of benefits to be derived. Now, they're marginal gain benefits because you're still going to be doing the work, right? That's the important thing. But I do think that it can deliver a lot of benefits and help smooth the rider out. It can even help avoid, for me, it's a really good check system because I can't just rely on my bike being a fixed anchor and then slide around and behave how I want. I have to make sure that I'm being really smooth on the pedals. And that actually is one thing that really helps me personally avoid injury because then I'm making sure that everything's tracking right. I'm engaging properly, all of that stuff. So give them a shot if you haven't. You can find rollers for pretty cheap and it's not too big of a deal. And it kind of spices things up in terms of your indoor training experience. So changes it up. David's question, he says, as you guys often say on the podcast, life happens, and it happened to me 7 weeks ago. I rolled my ankle on a trail run and haven't really been able to do much since. I've watched my friends' power go higher and higher as I sat idle. I feel I won't be able to keep up with them on group rides any longer. I took about a 30 to 40 watt FTP hit in the 7 weeks off. He's at about 242, he said right now. I like how he says about 242. It's very specific, right?
242-ish.
Yeah. It's like me with my top.
Could be 242.5.
The top 23 at a result, right? Yeah, something like that. And then he says VO2 max decrease of 5 according to his Garmin, and then he says he gained about 7 pounds. In other words, right now David's freaking out because he's a cyclist and type A athlete, right? And he's like, I'm losing it, and everyone in the world is faster than me because of this one thing, right? Says, I'm curious what style of training is the most effective way to get it all back. Really, what I read that as is, what in the world can I do to get this back tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
That's what he's really asking. Should I be focusing on volume, intensity, both? I'm suffering from a bit of lack of motivation due to the losses and seeing my friends' increases. Do you have any tips to overcome the psychological side of this? So last little bit, he says, 5-star podcast, listen every day for about 1.5 hours, and I feel sad when I've reached the end of the backlog and have to wait a week between episodes. I can't wait to start a particular plan when I start training heavily again. I'm just not sure that now is the right time for me to sign up for my lack of motivation. So, Nate, we didn't talk about this, but I want a quote that you said the other day to one of our employees. It was so good. He got to a point where he peaked. He got to a point where he tried to bring that peak too long. He got tired. And then at that point now, he's had plenty of time off to recover. And this guy, the employee at our office here, he's saying, now I'm just going to do some easy stuff for a while and just kind of ride however I want and just kind of do the easy stuff before I really get into training. And you said something to him,
Well,
and I think it
Chad
actually
said.
applies.
Chad says it. You don't need to work out to work out.
No, you said that. Let me say that
say a
back
lot
to
of
you.
things,
Yeah,
yeah.
you said, let me say that back to you. I'm going to take all this freshness I've built up and get rid of this freshness before I actually start training.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a great point.
It's true.
I hadn't thought of it in that regard.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And in this case, it's kind of like, I'm just not sure I want to jump into a plan yet. I kind of want to noodle around and get things back where I want to be. And that is really common.
And that what happens, I see this so much with high level well, not even just age group
Anybody.
athletes. You are afraid to do a test and get your zones because it is your FTP is tied to your self-worth. So before that,
Incorrectly, but it is.
Yep, you want to do like a whole bunch of like quick hitting VO2 max or sprints or something like that to get it higher, so that when you do the ramp test, it's you have a higher number and you won't feel so bad about yourself.
Yes.
When honestly, got lots of data to show this. Just follow like sweet spot base, and over the course of the season, you'll be better.
You'll be
than having to work out before you work out.
Yeah, further.
Yeah.
Work out before you work out. You'll be
Yes.
further along for sure. Yeah, exactly. And it's also, on the training side of things, just get into a plan. And it's fine if you can reduce the workout intensity. That's okay. You can take a test.
Well, just do the ramp test and you'll be fine.
and you're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, coming back from injury, just talk to your doctor, of course.
Of course.
Don't pedal if you have pain. Anecdotally, did I say that word right?
That's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
We've had ourselves ankle injuries where we've all sprained them.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, we've had PTs and doctors recommend cycling as long as there's not pain. But every injury is different. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, talk to your...
Talk to your doctor.
Yeah, so it happened twice to me. And both times my ankle ballooned up to the point where the swelling pushed into my foot enough. It was hard to get my cycling shoe on. And of course, my ankle's very delicate, so getting the shoe on was a bit uncomfortable.
Yep.
But I'd get it on. And
Whoa, is that Chad's foot?
yeah, so that's
We're
one of
looking
them.
at it now.
That's one of them. That was the first one when I taught
you're
spin classes.
You can watch, on YouTube. You could join us every week, and you'd be able to see this. That's Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific is usually when we record.
Yep.
You could see Chad's swollen ankle.
So that's one of them, right? So once I got the shoe on, pedaling a bike actually worked wonders. I mean, I'm not doing explosive sprints or anything, but I was still teaching a spin class, and it was still, basically a high intensity interval training course. This is what people expected, so that's what I had to deliver. And I know you can always dial the tension down on them.
But
the fact is,
Chad was sitting at 1.
the fact is, you can pedal a bike. You can pedal a bike just fine because there's not a lot of lateral motion going on, right? There's not a lot of challenge for the damaged connective tissue. And then the same thing that happened again when I taught the indoor power classes, and I knew, I can probably do this. And I pushed it a little further in terms of actually doing a bit of high intensity work and got away with it. I'm not saying it's something you should just gamble with, but the fact is if you feel pain, just ease up.
Yeah.
But riding a bike is super beneficial in terms of rehabbing a rolled ankle.
Yeah, extremely
And I
common.
confirmed it twice.
You can also see this in the forum. If you type in episode
233.
Gosh, that's a lot.
I know. They're racking up.
I know, racking up. Chad, what happens? So this happens a lot too. People take some time off. You fall quickly, but you actually come back quicker, or come back quickly also.
Yeah.
Let's say you're in the middle of sweet spot base, and the workouts start to get pretty easy, right? Should I retest? Should I just bump it up a little bit, or should I just ride it through? Or any of the three are
retest or bump it up. I wouldn't just ride it through. Right. At that point, you're not receiving a sufficient training stimulus anymore. So you're kind of just going through motions, and you're going to stagnate. And when there is still some low hanging fruit there, you're still in the midst of improving. You don't have to wait for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or getting through a plan before you reassess. You certainly don't have to wait any period of time before you just nudge it up a few watts because maybe you feel good that day, maybe you recognize there's been an improvement in your fitness, etc.
What about going from like low to mid volume?
You can do that too. You can increase your volume. Yeah. Keep your threshold just the same. Keep the intensity just the same, but start doing more work.
The other thing I want to say, and some people will adjust, like they'll do the ramp test, they'll go through sweet spot base, and these are not threshold intervals, right? So each interval should not be like you could turn up, like everyone could probably turn up their sweet spot workouts and be gassed,
get them done.
Right, and get them done.
Still get it done, but that'll catch up with you.
Exactly. So just because there is some room, you don't need to press it against it where every interval is like, oh my gosh, that was amazingly hard. Like that's coming.
That's why the ramp test is so great.
Yeah.
Because then there's less guesswork in there.
So you could just do the ramp test in the middle of the plan.
It's
if you think that you've jumped about. But also too, these plans are progressive. So just because I'm experiencing right now in high volume and I kind of want to bump it up, but I'm also like haven't done this much volume consistently and I still have 4 weeks and I'm like, it's going to catch up.
Absolutely something to be wary of.
And the intervals get longer and at a higher percentage. And I'm like, I really want to have like a week where every workout is pretty easy before I bump it up. Or how my strategy is, Chad, the last interval before some of the easy days, I bump up a little bit and I'm going to see how that responds.
Get a taste of it.
Yeah, just a taste of it, like a small dose, and have a recovery day. Because so often I've done this. I don't know if you guys do this too. Your eyes are bigger than your stomach, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
You turn it up and then you miss a quality workout.
And then the next day.
Yeah, and then it's like bad. And then it's a spiral.
Yeah.
So don't fall in that trap, David.
Yeah. Err on the side of caution.
Yeah.
On the psychological side of things, for the worry that he has that every cyclist does. So first of all, we're really good at thinking of ourselves in a vacuum, and we think that we're the only one suffering any sort of the bad luck that's fallen upon us, anything like that. And we think everybody else is having no problems whatsoever, and why me, right? That's just human. Like we're really good at doing that, and it's a bad thing. So first of all, remember the fact that everybody's going to have setbacks. And at some point, if you're sick right now, they're going to be sick later. If you're injured right now, somebody's going to get injured at some other point later. And I'm not saying that as ill will toward anybody else, but I'm just trying to show the fact that it's all a bit chaotic and it all will happen. And at some point, and don't worry, you're not at a massive disadvantage.
Yeah, injuries and illness happen. You just have to roll with it. It's going to be a setback, but it'll be a temporary one. So just recognize that it's just right now.
And drops happen too.
Totally.
Did you drop this off season? How much did you drop?
I ended up dropping like 12 watts, 15 watts.
I dropped 20 watts.
Yep.
How much did you drop, Chad?
A lot.
100?
Yeah. No, seriously.
Like
that's not
seriously, 100 watts.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when you're off the bike for 6 months. But
Yeah. Like
that's how it goes.
So don't worry about it. Also, what you can do for motivation-wise is start a season at the beginning of your new, like when you come back, start a season for then, and you'll start to see PRs for that season.
It's motivating.
I'm like for this time period, I want to see myself improve. And as you do longer, like you go through the plans and the workouts do get harder inside of a plan, you'll start to get more PRs because you'll do more wattage and stuff. And
one of the features of Trainer Road that isn't used nearly enough. Everybody listening to this, you should go to your personal records and you can create seasons for any time frame.
Yeah, on the website.
And then you can compare your PRs from any season to another. And it's hugely helpful. Like, I live and die by that. It's so helpful for me. And then you can go even a step further. And let's say that you're 6 weeks back into coming back from your injury and you have injury recovery, something like that, whatever you want to name it as a season. You can see what that was like when you were compared to 6 weeks coming in from coming off the couch the last time. And I guarantee you'll see that you're actually not as far behind as you think. So it's a really good way to get apples to apples. That part's called season match.
Although
awesome.
What you're saying, like, so although I am less than peak last year, I'm ahead of November from last year.
Exactly.
Therefore, I'm very excited.
Yep. Exactly right. Yeah. It's not, you don't have to wait till peak fitness to find out if you're fast, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's it. Brian says, hello guys, love the podcast and been watching and listening since the first episode. Long story short, I'm a triathlete looking to change into the cycling realm. Please give me direction on where to start and the best way to go about it. I'm changing over as I'm tired of dealing with running injuries. For some background, I'm 27 and been in endurance sport for about 5 years and go 4:15 in half Ironman, so 70.3. That's a very fast athlete. While cycling sub 10, so he's doing a 26 mile an hour average.
210.
Or 210. Forgive me. Thanks, Chad.
Yep.
And he says I've averaged 19 hours a week this year, and as high as 27 hours.
Oh, wow.
That's pro time commitment right there.
That's training volume, and I assume across all 3 disciplines, right? So that's a lot. He says I can regularly handle 900 TSS weeks, and he's talking about across the spectrum, I assume, and start carrying fatigue from 1 week to the next at 1,000 plus with peak weeks around 1,200. My watts per kilo on the TT bike is 4.75. Yikes. And on the road bike, I'd guess around 5. My power under 5 minutes is laughable, but likely pretty good in the 4 to 5 hour duration. Well, we're good at what we do, right? Yeah, exactly. He says, so his question, do I hire a coach to teach me the ropes and target specific types of races? Or do I dabble in everything from mountain bike to cyclocross to road and gravel? And should I skip the coach thing and just sign up for Trainer Road? And if so, do I start with a high volume plan? I'm really looking forward to this change and would appreciate any insight on the cycling world. So this is like, well, first of all, insight into the cycling world. You're listening to the right podcast for that. The other side of it too is I would follow Cat3 memes, Feed Zone memes, all those other ones that you can find on Instagram, because that'll familiarize you with the culture in a much more enjoyable way rather than showing up at a road race and seeing people that actually live that meme lifestyle.
Help you never take yourself.
Get to know from memes before you meet the real people. But honestly, this is almost like a fun thing. It's almost like if you had $1 million, like how would you spend it right now?
It is.
Yeah, right? 'Cause, oh my goodness.
I kind of see him like a junior rider where you just want to try everything. Try anything and everything that's interesting to you, because you'll find something you absolutely love.
Right?
Yeah.
And he's like a junior rider who's going to be the next international phenom, because he can tolerate ridiculously high training loads, and he's already got a very high FTP.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
It's a kid in a candy store.
Yeah. So tons of high weekly training load right now. The guy has it already in stock, right? He can tolerate quite a lot.
Yeah, and it's probably going to be low intensity though, and that's with the triathlon
That's
stuff.
the point I wanted to make.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can't get 19 hours at 900 TSS. I could get like 12 hours and get 900 TSS with intensity. Mm-hmm. And that is probably too why his 5 minute power is so low. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But think of this, he's got this huge base like built over years, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So now, Chad, the question about well, let's go into the plan volume. Then we'll talk later about what kind of plans.
Okay.
I think this is one of the few people who could start with high volume right away.
Yep.
I don't know why not, because it's even the highest. What does that jump up to? You're doing it right now,
800 or something.
Yeah.
Yep.
So even at its highest point, it's already less than he's used to tolerating on a pretty regular basis.
It's a little different though.
I was just gonna say the composition of the training is different. So now he's working on something that's more akin to muscular endurance and not just aerobic endurance. So the intensity jumps up enough for me still to be a little worried with making a high volume recommendation. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I don't know how he's ramped up to the point he is right now, but he could use maybe a little downturn in activity, a little recovery time, and he could do that via a mid-volume plan, see if that mid-volume is in fact something he can tolerate well, and then jump up to the high volume. And I know the composition of the mid versus the high when it comes to the sweet spot plans is quite a bit different. That the mid's mixed, whereas the high is strictly sweet spot. But it would expose him to some types of training that he hasn't done, start shifting emphasis to different energy systems. I think that would actually be a really beneficial way for him to start.
Yeah.
I think two points that I want to make on this. This is a great example of why we have said not all TSS is created equal, right?
Yeah.
Like this is like exhibit A of that. And it might feel really tough to do 900 TSS when it's all structured and higher intensity.
Absolutely. I mean, 900 TSS, if we go out and we ride 3 hours every day at 60%, I mean, basically what we did in Hawaii and dial it back a little bit. At the end of the week, you feel great. But if you jump into 900 TSS of sweet spot work over the course of a week, it's going to really ruin most people.
Yeah.
The other point that I wanted to make too is the fact that if he does start with the mid volume, that will give him some more time to just ride and maybe get familiar with things. Who knows? In this case, Brian might have, and Brian's, by the way, watching in the chat right now. So, hey, Brian. So if Brian, in this case, you've been spending a ton of time in aero position and you haven't been working on cornering and you haven't been working on anything else like that, this could be, if you started with the mid-volume plan, it might give you the intensity that you need to get familiar with that, then also affords you the time to get out and to work on skills and to get more acquainted with just riding the road bike as a road biker rather than a guided missile, which is a TT, right? A TT bike. So it could help.
Brian, in the chat right now, say what your goals are. What do you want to do? Like, do you want to race and be competitive, just have fun, national championship, do like big events, something like that? But based on so you've wrote down mountain bike, cross, road, and gravel. Based on your power profile, the easiest one I think for you to get into would be gravel. Gravel's got the most it feels like triathlon to me. Everyone's very supportive. It's going to be not as much like 5-minute power or big surges. It's going to be just sustained power, like probably sweet spot anaerobic stuff over many hours.
Yep.
The one that would be probably road. I'll just go through them all. Road. Depending on the course, you're probably not going to get dropped until the end because if you don't have good 5-minute power or like a breakaway, that is where it's like 1 5-minute power happens all the time in road races where the separation happens.
And that thrusts him right into the world of mass start racing too, whereas gravel racing,
you can ride by yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You can decide.
Yeah, it's mass start, but it's not the crazy.
With a road race, you do everything you can to stay with the group. And gravel racing, you can kind of call your day as you see it.
I'm assuming Brian's had some experience riding in a pack because if you're this level, you just naturally probably ride with people.
Probably have
5 watts.
Safe assumption.
If you're 5 watts per kilo and never ridden with anyone, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Cross, that's probably going to be your big cross and mountain. I'm guessing is going to be your biggest weakness because it's all about high
technical
power
and energy demands
exactly.
all over the board.
The opposite of triathlon, although so much fun. If you want to do that, and then also crit racing.
I think is a ton of fun.
Brian, if you want to, let's see if he's responded yet. Get competitive, do stage races there in a year or two. Okay, so
stage racing, cool.
I was going to say that. Brian, you are a Cat 1 racer. If you want to be competitive, crits, road races, and stage races, and with your TT, you should be able to destroy
you
and
do
all
really
of that.
well.
Yep, I think you can get to Cat 1 if you do enough races in 1 season, if not 2 seasons, at 5 watts per kilo. I don't know how much you weigh, but it could be hard if you're like 130 pounds. But if you're 160, 5 watts, you're going to walk through it. Well, I think we have another question about this coming up, but for you, so these early categories, upgrade as fast as you can because it's going to be no competition for you.
Right.
You got to get those 10 starts, go off the front.
Yeah.
It's going to be really easy.
Yeah.
And then also watch our videos on YouTube, YouTube/Trina Road. Pete has analyzed my races and Jonathan's races. Pete is such a great wealth of knowledge for cycling tactics, and you will learn a whole bunch of stuff. But again, it's hard to apply them if you can just ride away from everyone in the field.
In fact, we just posted, you can go on there, we just posted from an Omnium that we had. We had a TT, a road race, and a criterium. And we just posted the road racing criterium videos from that. We didn't do the TT because I don't think that would be very interesting, but who knows? And we walked through all the different tactics that came out and how you race an Omnium different from a stage race, but also the principles in many regards also apply to a stage race. Really good videos. You guys should check them out. And then we have another one coming up tomorrow where Pete and I break down all the do's and don'ts of a breakaway of basically like how to consider the elements, how to consider your position on the course and relative to the other people in the group. And then basically with the end result being how to get rid of people in a breakaway or how to keep people in and then also how to get away from a breakaway or how to stay in, how to use it. So it's tons of good information. Can I add one thing on gravel?
You can add as many things as you would like, Jonathan.
Thanks, Nate. I'll take that. The thing about the gravel part that's interesting, and I think a lot of people don't think about this really with gravel, but if you look at it, there are some light riders that do well in gravel, but big riders naturally tend to do better in it. And a lot of that is because the surface, just rolling along that surface, sucks out a static wattage out of everybody across the board.
Yeah,
right?
like the best cobble racers. Same idea.
Same idea. So if my FTP is 100 watts and then Chad's is 400 watts, and let's say that riding across the cobbles takes 20 watts out of us, that 20 watts is a much greater percentage of my threshold than it is for Chad. So as a result, it's going to be tougher for me to carry the same pace and to hold with the groups, that sort of thing. So having a higher threshold and being able to have that higher sustained power, that sort of thing, being used to putting out power for a really long duration, I think you'll find you'll do really well at gravel. And then the final point on gravel is I think a lot of stage races are adding in gravel races now. We saw it in Cascade last year. Chico's done it for
Gravel
quite
stages.
some time. Gravel stage,
segments.
gravel segment within it.
Yeah.
So it's an important thing to familiarize yourself with regardless.
Brian's 145, and he's done a 52 for 40K. So he's pretty much like you. He can. So at that weight, I would actually, instead of doing like a dirty Kanza, although that is like a flatter gravel.
Lots of rolls. Yeah.
Yeah, but
nonstop.
it's still the long climbs at 5 watts per kilo. Lots of separation is going to happen. I'm thinking he's pretty much you.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He can destroy.
He stands to do really well at stage races.
Yeah. So
Especially if they start with a time trial.
for plans, what I would have him do, Chad, and you back me up if I'm wrong. Sweet spot base, 1 and 2, general build, and then rolling road race. I think that would be probably a pretty good mix where you could do
nice
crits, TTs, and road racing, and you'd probably be good at all of that, and not so much intensity, but a good amount of intensity and threshold work.
And it plays on all of his strengths and helps him develop some things that he hasn't really addressed. Can't even call them weaknesses. He just hasn't addressed them.
Yeah, that's a great
Thank
point.
you.
That's a really good point.
Yes, because don't pigeonhole yourself, Brian, and be like, I have no anaerobic power because you've been training long flow distance at 27 hours a week.
Right.
You're going to be good at that.
Yeah, I don't know how to ride tight switchbacks, stuff like that. Well, it's not a weakness. You just haven't built it yet. It takes everybody, and it's tough for everybody. So, yeah, awesome. Let's go to Michael's question.
Cool.
He says, podcast listener turned trainer road user, and I love everything you put out. Thanks, Michael. We appreciate that. Says, can you please explain the use of spacers and suspension? When would it be beneficial for heavy versus light riders? How do you measure and assess when and how many spacers to add? And how does this tune your suspension? So first things first, before we answer those questions, we'll talk about the principles of like why you'd want to do this. Yeah, sure. It's all you, Chad.
I know literally nothing about this.
So the what we're basically talking about is air suspension. So in like heavier bikes, like downhill bikes, that sort of stuff, you'll see coil suspension. In that case, some enduro bikes. But almost all of our suspension has air. And basically, instead of having a coil spring, it has just a volume of air. And as you compress that, it gets harder. You could do the same thing with any water bottle. Try to squeeze your water bottle. It's easy to get some movement, but then it gets harder and harder the more you squeeze it, right? So it uses the same principle to cushion with suspension. So when you're talking about adding a volume spacer, you're talking about making it's basically that space of air smaller. So you're having a smaller spring, so to speak. Doesn't mean that your travel is any smaller. The fork can still, or the shock can still go through the same 6 inches or whatever it has, but you're just changing the actual part that manages the cushioning. You're making that smaller, right? So when you have less air can volume, making it smaller with spacers, that means it's going to be more progressive. And I want you to visualize with me, if you were to graph the force that it would take to go through suspension, it would be like a curve that starts low and then ramps up progressively.
It gets firmer sooner in the stroke.
Yes, it does. And initially in the stroke, it's going to be, we'll get into that in just a bit. Yeah. Now, if you have more air can volume, so you're taking spacers out and it's a bigger one, it's going to be more linear. So that graphed line is going to have less of a curve and less of a sweep up. It's going to be more, we're not talking a perfectly straight linear line, but it's going to be more like that. So when you look at a graph like that, I also want you to think in your mind that there are 3 parts of your suspension. This is really easy to think of. There's the initial part of your stroke. Some people call it the top. So that's only when you've gone through a little bit of your suspension travel. There's the mid part, and then there's the end, like Neapolitan ice cream, right? Think of it that way, like 3 tiers, right? So there's 3 tiers that you have, the initial, mid, and end, or however you want to phrase them. And when you have a progressive suspension design, if you're adding volume spacers, it's going to make that initial part really supple and nice and soft. That could be bad depending on the suspension design of the bike and what you're doing. When you make it more linear, it's going to make that initial part much more firm and supportive off the top. Now, if you talking about the bottom end of things with the suspension, if you have a progressive one, so once again, you're adding in air spacers or adding in those volume spacers, that's going to make it so that it ramps up really quick. And it's going to make it really hard to bottom out your suspension or to get to the point where you use up all the air or all the travel.
Is this where it makes it like you can get kind of poppy and springy suspension to jump in and out of like corners when it's progressive?
Can be. Yeah, can be, kind of. But not entirely, because a linear design can also be poppy as well to a certain degree. So when you go, yeah, I know, right? On the linear side of things, though, that's going to make the bottom end of things, you'll be able to blow through that stroke more readily. So that's almost never a desirable characteristic of suspension. Sure. Like you don't want to just blow through and hear a loud clank, right, when you use all your suspension. Now, this goes for cross-country and everything to downhill, like gravel bikes now and all the way up to it. The interesting thing, though, so a lot of people talk about like, yeah, I need to make it more progressive because it's too harsh off the top and then I blow through the stroke is what they say. In other words, I go all the way down because it's too linear. So they make it progressive. And then at that point, it makes it so that it's initially supple and then it ramps up. And that usually makes people really happy. But there's the other side of things where if your bike, just the suspension design and everything else makes everything really harsh off the top, which depending on the location of your pivots and all that stuff will happen. If it's really harsh, you're really going to want to have a progressive design. But then there are some bikes like Giants come to mind, for example, Giant bicycles. They tend to have a very initially plush setup. So you kind of don't want a really progressive shock because then it'll sit really down low and it'll be wallowy and not supportive at all. So it's all about kind of finding a balance, and that's the tricky part. But a good rear suspension design, and you'll find this when you really get into like a high, like, you know, a bike will come in like 6 different configurations. And at the highest end, or if you go with like a boutique brand, like Evil, Yeti, something like that, they put a ton of work into making sure that it's perfect and you don't have to worry about it, right? You can add spacers, but chances are you won't need to. But for certain bikes, you do need to play around with it. And this is why riders end up putting in volume spacers. It's super easy to do. You just like you let the pressure out, twist the can off, clip something on, twist it back on and pump it up. And so you don't even need tools in many cases to be able to do it. So it's an easy thing to do. So stepping back from all of that. Yeah, go ahead.
Would my bike come with volume spacers or something I buy aftermarket?
It depends. I think I've seen with some bikes, they'll send volume spacers, but it's pretty rare. So you can get it aftermarket from any bike shop or big distributor. They'll have them there. So and they're pretty easy to do. If you don't want to do it too, give it to a shop, and it shouldn't be an expensive thing for them to do, and it should take like 5 minutes or less. So in fact, I've carried volume spacers with me while riding, and then when I'm getting a new bike and I'm trying to figure out a new bike.
You're a nerd.
Yeah, I'm a total nerd. But when I'm trying to figure out the new bike, and then I'll just pull over, pull out a spacer, let the air out, and then just pump it right back up.
How much is a spacer?
The space in terms of cost?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, they'll be like, you can get like a 5 set, 5 spacers for like $5 to $10.
Okay.
There's next to nothing.
Cool.
Relatively speaking. So for bike modifications you can do. So this is why people want to do this, because they're trying to get their suspension to sit in the right spot and then behave how they want it to behave. And the one caveat that I would say with this, and I know this is pretty nerdy here, but whenever they talk about progressive or linear, everyone talks about the initial part and then everyone talks about the bottom part of the stroke or the end part. And they don't want to bottom out, but they want it to be supple. But they never talk about the mid portion of the stroke. And for all of us listening to this that like to pedal, that's like the most important part. Really good suspension designs will have you rest kind of so that you're at the top of that middle. And then as a result, like it kind of firms up. But most suspension designs aren't refined to that degree. So then as a result, you have to play around with these volume spacers. Gotcha. And if you're just focusing on the end or just on the initial, you might miss out on the mid stroke. And that's what really depends or makes your bike poppy or not. If you have a really good supportive mid stroke, your bike is going to feel more poppy and fun and lively. And if you have one that doesn't have a supportive mid stroke, then you're going to feel like when you push through, you're standing on a waterbed. And that's not good unless you're like and even for downhill guys, it's really not ideal, but unless you just want to blow through everything. So his question specifically, when would it be beneficial for heavy versus light riders? So heavy riders usually blow through the stroke more, right? You can put more pressure into your shock, but it may not be designed for you if you fall outside the bell curve of what the engineer said when he designed the shock with that bike. So in many cases, they need to add in more spacers. That's kind of common. The only situation where you wouldn't do that if you're a heavy rider is if you have a bike that's naturally really initially plush, like a Giant, something like that. And then as a result, you would actually want it to sit higher in the stroke. So then you would take a spacer out. For light riders, almost always you really want to go on the progressive side, almost always, because the bike's going to beat you up over every root and every rock. And if you have a gravel bike, this is something for you to consider that has like full suspension. I know some of them exist like this. It's something to consider. I think with gravel, it makes much more sense to err on progressive rather than linear. So it's going to make it so that you don't get beat up. And then how do you measure and assess when and how many spacers to add? It's all about, so my rule always with suspension adjustments is I move 2 at a time, then move back 1. So if I'm going to adjust a clicker on my suspension, I don't just adjust it once. I go 2 clicks in the direction that I want to try, and then I test it out because it's an easier difference to feel. Heck, you could even go 3 or 4 clicks. Some people call this bracketing, this whole process. So you'll move a chunk of clicks, and then you might move back half of what you did, right?
It's a binary search tree.
Yeah, exactly. There we are. Yeah, another way to think of it. And when you do that, that should help you feel the difference of kind of the characteristic that you're going for, and then you can step back. And with volume,
could be subtle.
Totally. And to give you an example of like, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking like, I probably won't use this, but you totally, if you do, it can be really helpful. And it's really not that complex because you aren't even using tools, and all you have to do is clip something on and then see if it feels better. That's it. Like, it's really not, it's not like you're getting any data points. You're just seeing if it feels better. Because I have 5 spacers in my SB 150 because I'm so light for that bike, right? Whereas on my SB 100, I think it comes with 2 or 1 stock, and I haven't touched it. It's perfect for where it needs to be. But certain bikes, I take them all out or put them all in. It all depends. So I think this is going to get more interesting once we get into like road suspension, because I'm sure it's coming. We'll have suspension that's designed into road bikes, and I bet we'll be able to just adjust the dial right there, like on top. MRP, the suspension I use, I don't put in volume spacers in that. I can just click the fork and it changes it, and it like just with a clicker. It's really cool. So anyways, that's how you do that.
What if you can't feel it?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You do a race with your fork locked out and don't even know. I think like there's like people like you who understand, something's bad, but everyone else is just like, I just ride my mountain bike and it feels pretty good. Yeah. Like, where do you experiment? What do you do?
Honestly, the Shock Whiz can be helpful because, and I don't know if the Shock Whiz now tells you if you should add volume spacers. I think it only just advises on compression and rebound and air pressure, how much you should put in there. But it can be helpful to guide you in terms of calibrating your feeling. And something you can do with the Shock Whiz for fun, and producer Tucker's going to put a link to that. Basically, Quark made something where you just screw it into the suspension or the air valve cap on your suspension. Then it uses accelerometers and lots of math to be able to tell you how you should tune your suspension.
It does suggest volume spacers.
Cool. And something you can do with that, if you feel like you struggle feeling what suspension changes feel like, is go extreme and like throw your clickers in 1 degree and then use the Shock Whiz and kind of like calibrate, this is what I feel versus this is what the Shock Whiz says. And go extreme, and then make sure you always write down your settings, and then go to where you back to where you were. And then you might be able to say, like, even though this was extremely far in this direction, I did like this one part of how it behaved. So you may be able to refine it that way.
And you can't use that with live valve Shock Whiz.
No, I know you can't.
And I believe you can't use it with the brain too. The specialized brain.
I think it would throw everything off if you had that because it's got something upstream that's making some changes that it isn't accounting for. Right. So, yes, that's the way to do it. The other way to do it also, but this is really tough. So, Nate, if you had another, which it's really tough for a person like Nate, it'd be much easier for a person like myself or Chad. But if you find a person that's proportioned like you and either rides like you or understands how you ride, and then you can get a good feedback point, right? So this is the whole theory of test drivers. Like, so at Formula One, Lewis Hamilton isn't in the car every day testing, but there is somebody testing his car every single day. And these people understand how Lewis Hamilton drives and then understand how it feels. And then they try to bring it in.
If there's any tall, lanky, horrible riders out there, let me know what your suspension is.
Go on. Yeah. Robbie Stout, actually, the guy that owns the Ritual Chocolate in Park City, he's like proportioned like you. He also has like a 400 something watt FTP.
The what Yeti did, which was very nice, is they just said we put in my like numbers, and
Your
they just
height,
told me
weight,
exactly the clicks and the like everything to set up the shock.
Yeah.
And it feels to me amazing. And actually, I'm not the best feeling, obviously, but I went faster, which
Yeah.
that's what I want.
Yep. Yeah. And if you ever feel like I don't know of other brands that do that, but they all should do that for sure.
All should.
But if you do have a situation like that where you are like, if you get a Yeti and you have that sort of thing, and you feel like it isn't right, email them, because they have a huge bank of data that they're collecting, and they want feedback on all of it. And then they go out and they replicate and they test to see if they can refine it further. So they're like actively refining it. I think it's the way of the future, especially once we get suspension on road bikes. So
We have it already on
Yeah.
gravel road bikes, but
Yeah.
it's pretty much a road bike.
once we get damped suspension, I should say, right?
Oh, yeah.
Controlled
Not just a
suspension.
spring.
Not
Yeah.
just a spring. It'll be cool. Tom's question, he says, "Hi team, love the podcast, 5-star listener." I'm glad he rated himself there. That's pretty good. You can leave those ratings, by the way, on iTunes for yourself or for us, however you wish. He says, "I finally mustered up the courage to race after almost 2 years of riding. I entered a Division 3, which is akin to a C grade local crit, which was 40 minutes plus 1 lap. The wind was blowing at 60 kilometers an hour. Yikes, that's a strong one. On the back section through the rolling hills. After 3 laps, I realized no one really wanted to pull, and people didn't pedal through the corners. So as a 6'7", he's taller than you, Nate.
Damn.
94 kg.
94 kilogram rider.
Bigger, 20 pounds heavier. Too.
Pretty crazy. I would just flow through the corners, and after a small effort, I realized I was pulling away. Long story short, I won by almost half a lap and have been automatically pushed to the Division 2 or B grade. After studying your videos, I wasn't able to implement any strategy, and it was more of an FTP effort rather than a race. Should I contest the upgrade and keep racing in C for a few races to get experience, or should I just suck it up and learn in Division 2B from Tom? So before we throw out the initial answer, this is a good point, because this brings up like a question, because one of our advice points that we've given, Chad, is that don't move up too early, right? And because the point of the whole upgrade system isn't that you just get faster, but that you require the necessary experience.
Sure.
So what do we say in this case? Do you want to jump in
Well, we kind of
first,
just
Nate?
broached this, in that, if he's simply too powerful to be able to race with these guys and be challenged, what's he going to learn from riding off the front every time he gets in a situation where he realizes he's got vastly more power than his competitors?
He'll be really good at riding alone.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's not a lot of learning to be done there.
Or you'll develop bad habits.
Yeah,
Because
totally.
you'll be in certain situations where your fitness will just win the race.
You'll be able to get away with bad things.
Exactly. Attacking first lap. You're like, I just win. So I just do.
I don't know what all these people talk about. Don't attack from the gun. Works
I've
for me
talked
every time.
about fighting children, but imagine you're an MMA fighter and you're 18 years old, and they always put you against 12-year-olds, and you're like, I don't want to upgrade too fast, and you're just learning all this technique against 12-year-olds.
Just choking them all out.
Yeah, just 3 at once. Come on. We got to put you against people at your level in order to learn tactics. So we got to get you against some 18-year-olds and people your size who can do it. But I mean, that's
Nacho
what it's
Libre. Yeah.
right. Just one at a time, throwing people around, and that's what you're doing if you just you pulled away without even trying. And good for you for having the fitness to do that.
Way to go.
Also in Division 2, it could be safer generally. So it's another benefit to get. Usually the lowest category is a little more squirrely, although it's still a little squirrely.
And learning from your
Squirreliness all
fellow
over.
riders is a hard thing to do in the lower categories. A little easier to do in the upper categories because you're dealing with riders with a whole lot more experience, a lot more lessons to share.
Yeah, and the interesting thing too is when you ride with those riders, so you're going to have a ton of fitness, and maybe even enough fitness to ride at the very front of the next division you go with, right? In this case, it's big FTP, that sort of a thing. But at the same time, I think it's really beneficial, and we've talked about this plenty of times. You're learning as a cyclist. You don't have to win every race. In fact, I think it's beneficial in this case for you to kind of set different goals for your first races and say, I want to figure out what it's like to ride in a pace line. I want to figure out what it's like to ride in a breakaway, or I want to figure out what it's like to have to bridge or to chase things down, that sort of thing. If you do that, it's a good way to fast track your experience rather than always just trying to win. Because then you'll start to figure things out. You'll find yourself at the front anyway, and that's when you can focus on winning. But if you kind of set those other goals, it can be really helpful.
Yeah, and I feel like he could do those things in the lower category, the Division 3C, but he's going to have to rein himself in constantly.
It's like bowling with bumpers, too.
Everything will win.
Yeah,
If
it's
he
like
just-
bowling with bumpers.
every
right?
strategy he tries will win.
He can
just-
throw
yeah,
it
he's just gonna-
sideways. He can throw it straight down, and it'll
this
always.
is
If he
a
just, like,
situation to quickly
pulled-
bypass the upgrade.
If without attacking, he just pulled away from the front, and then they couldn't. I'm assuming they chased. They couldn't catch him.
Yeah.
It's just upgrade.
Because that's one thing in like lower categories, they basically never want anybody to get away because
Yeah, that's
they-
just too much of a disparity. I can understand why you'd want to just jump straight through to the 2B.
Yep. Yeah.
You might even go to Division 1. I think one part that gets for Northern California a big jump 3 to 2 because when you're 2 you do the P1-2 races.
Yeah. It's big.
Yeah, that could be. That's usually when people never place again.
Yeah.
Right?
Say
Usually,
goodbye
yeah.
to winning. Yeah. Yeah.
I just upgraded and I'm just like, oh shoot.
That's
Yeah,
why
but you
people.
can still do P1, 2, 3 or Masters,
Masters.
1, 2, 3.
That's
why,
the
that's why
saving
people
grace.
stay. That's why people stay in Cat 3 forever,
And
and
you
they never
do
want to leave.
Yeah.
right?
The rare Cat 2 race.
Yeah.
I mean, they're out there.
Yeah. And they're usually very competitive if it's just a Cat 2 race.
I know because everyone who wants to be a Cat 1
Yeah,
is in that
wanting
Cat
to
2
win that
race.
one, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's kind of how that goes. The one thing I would say is just remember the fact that you will not have the experience level of all of the riders that you'll be racing against. So even though you're just as fast, humility is huge. You'll be humbled regardless. Just check cycling memes for that sort of stuff. I think there's one that's like Masters Elite is one of the meme accounts, which is hilarious. He calls himself a Masters Elite, but jokes on the Masters sort of guys. That's a rough and tumble bunch a lot of the time in terms of them allowing a new guy into the group. So they'll tell you everything that you do wrong. They'll do all of that stuff. Just be ready for that sort of thing. The social aspect of it, I guess.
The older, in my experience, the older the guy, the more the feedback.
Yes, that's a very fair assumption. We should graph that. Yeah, for sure.
Although, a lot of times it's great feedback.
Yes, exactly. And that's the
So-
point is the humility can go a long way.
Yeah.
You have two ways that you can react to that. You can act like I'm faster than you, so I don't care, and I'm just going to do what I want. I don't think that's the best way to go. I think instead take every bit of advice as if it is really good advice, and then you'll figure out what's really good.
I'm going to go further and say 99.9% is great advice.
Yep.
And
Exactly.
occasionally, not great advice, but
Sure, exactly.
that's everybody, right? No one has great advice.
Yeah, and don't shoot the messenger. Bike racers in the middle of the race often don't deliver messages with the best bedside manner.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes.
That's true.
Yes. Tom's question. He says, forgive me, skipping past Tom. Joe's question. And this is the last one. Then we're going to go into some live questions you've submitted on YouTube. So he says, during races, I have a habit of overhydrating before a race. Coupled with a nervous bladder, I usually have to pee during a race, and most of my races have been trail or road running races where a quick stop in some bushes doesn't lead to much of a time loss. But on the bike, it seems like it really hurts your time. I've done 2 half Ironman distance races, and both times I ended up just peeing on myself on the bike. And I know cyclists are losing their mind right now, but welcome to it. This is just what happens.
It's sterile. It's cool.
He says, I'm competitive, but just with myself because I'm not anywhere close to winning any races I enter. I feel like this is in the same category as astronauts wearing diapers. Everyone does it, but just doesn't want to talk about it. As a triathlete, you usually can't draft, so I don't feel as weird doing it since people aren't really around you. But what about cycling road races? Is this a thing, or am I just weird? If it's the latter, please refer to my name as Bob on the show and not my real name. So Joe, we kept it as Joe, so hopefully that's a good sign for you right now on where we're at with this. But first, before we get into the tactics of that whole side of things, he's probably overhydrated, right?
Yeah, and overhydrated is probably not. I don't know. Is that really a thing? He's out of sodium balance, right? He's taking in too much water for the amount of salt that's in his bloodstream, so he's shedding that water. It's just maintaining balance. So the dilemma there becomes: do I drink less and risk underhydrating, which is a much bigger threat than needing to urinate occasionally on a bike, especially as the events get longer and longer and the conditions get more severe. So it's something you're probably not ever going to get exactly right. I don't know how you could possibly nail it. There are so many factors influencing. It's a tough thing. I'd much rather overhydrate, to coin a phrase maybe, than risk underhydration.
I find that I hardly ever before a race, and maybe this is because of hard lessons learned in the beginning or something, but I hardly ever underhydrate in terms of not drinking enough. And I find that I carry the bottle with me before the race and just nervous twitch. I just sip on that bottle nonstop, and then I find myself running to the bathroom nonstop before the race, right?
Yeah.
And
there's probably a better balance to be found in that case. You don't have to be extremely overhydrated.
And also remember like the nerve side of things. I experience more nerves,
That's
you
the
have to
thing.
go more.
Yep. Psychosomatic urgency.
Yeah, exactly. So, on the other side of things, a lot of the time we drink because when I'm nervous before a race, coming into a race, I guess I just have anticipation, whatever it may be. I tend to, when I'm I tend to get dry mouth. And then if I have dry mouth and then I'm drinking to satisfy that dry mouth, I will totally be in this boat. And I will never, I always have to go to bathroom, right? And this year I did kind of a weird thing with this. Basically, I always found that in the first 5 minutes of a race, I would feel like I had crazy dry mouth. And then I would drink my bottle and I would just keep drinking. And then throughout the rest of the race, I'd be terrified of when dry mouth would reappear. And then I'd drink again, right? And this year I actually kind of set a weird goal to not drink when I felt dry mouth in the beginning and instead just trust the hydration that I had coming in because it was good. And I found that if I just ignored it and thought past it for the first 5 minutes of the race, then my body was kind of like, oh yeah, remember, you should salivate. And then I never had issues after that. So, and it's something that I've actually considered to be really helpful because then I can control my calorie intake a little better in water and I don't have to worry about it. So I guess those are just some tips on the over or under hydration on what you're doing. Just when you come in, just make sure that you aren't just drinking a ton of water nonstop, but also just make sure you're not drying yourself out prior. Should we get on to peeing on the bike?
Let's do it.
Okay. Exciting times.
Okay, so I think being able to pee on the bike is a competitive advantage.
It is.
And if you've got a 5-hour road race, think about in the day, you don't pee for 5 hours.
Right. We all do.
You're probably a little bit dehydrated.
Yeah.
And especially in an Ironman, or halves, you can usually wait for the run. But in an Ironman, it's even more. If you're not peeing, if you don't pee once during 12 hours, maybe you're a little dehydrated, right?
That's a tough balance right there.
Right, exactly. To be able to walk that line perfectly.
Yes.
So I've done this, and thank you, Jesse Reeves. He
Local
taught
racer.
me. Local
Awesome
racer.
guy.
He taught me and helped me out. I did it at
Taught you how to pee?
on the bike. Yeah. I've done it 2 different ways. One, wait until you really need to go. And the normal feeling that you need to go, right now I have to go to the bathroom, is not enough. For me, at least for me, I have to really want to go.
It's not easy to get those muscles to let go while you're standing on a bike.
Yep. Yeah, and also pedaling on the bike, really hard.
Pedaling, super hard.
Yeah, some triathletes can, in aero, while pedaling, pee. I can't do that.
It's like the sign of a champion right there.
Yeah, or a racehorse. So
yes,
there's 2 times to do it. One, coasting down a long descent. So if you've got a long descent, you can go off the back and you can do these tips that I'm about to say. Mm-hmm. Or, which Jesse helped me with, is you get a buddy and you can help like you do for each other, and somebody pushes you. You go off the back, the Peloton, 10 feet or so, and somebody pushes the back of you and pedals while you do this. Standing. So first what you do, you have to stand up. Mm-hmm. You stand up, you get your feet level, and you relax. And as someone's pushing you, and then you just have to wait. It's going to take 10 or 15 seconds, at least for me. And then you start to go. And then it is the best feeling. It is like you just had, 12 recovery days in a row.
You carry so much anxiety, right? The whole time from it. And then suddenly you don't have that.
And there's this cognitive load where your RP is
that's
you're just thinking about it.
That's what I'm getting at.
Painful.
That's shedded in a race. You're like, let's attack. It's starting
let's
to go.
It's ready to go.
And as long as the group does not attack, but if the group does attack, you can wake it back up and do it another time. But a lot of time during these long road races, there's a lot of easy pedaling that happens. But I've done this. There's actually a video, I think we put it up, of you on our road race. When I did this in the beginning, you'll see me in the descent, and I'm like 30 feet off the back. That's because I'm peeing.
Okay.
Are you talking in your pants?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not.
So this carries to women too.
Yep.
Yep.
I'm not adjusting anything. I'm just peeing myself.
Gotcha.
Yep.
And you're probably so overhydrated too. It's mostly going to be clear,
Water.
hopefully.
Yeah.
And then it dries super quickly with the amount of airflow that's coming over you and the wicking clothing.
I cannot wait to see the comments on this. People are going to lose their
I know
minds.
this is gross, but it happens. You can also, though, sometimes the Peloton will stop and go to the bathroom.
Major break.
You'll see that at the top level. I think everybody kind of agrees. They're like, yeah, we don't want to do that, so we're just going to do this. But it's much harder for that. That reality is much rarer, or it's hardly encountered, especially if you're doing Cat 3 racing. It's not going to happen.
No nature breaks in Cat 3. I've never seen one.
I've been in Cat 3 races where everyone said, or some people say, let's do it. Like,
nobody listens.
Yeah, no one does.
Yeah, everyone attacks.
Yeah.
It's a very Cat 3 thing to do.
It has to be.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it's something that really, if it's a long enough race, it happens. I'm sure it happens in Dirty Kansas. I'm sure it happens in anything else like that too. It's not just triathletes. So we're breaking down fences between roadies and triathletes here, because roadies have always said triathletes are gross because they do this. Well, roadies do
This
it
can
too.
become a necessity in a 3-hour road race.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be a super long day.
Becomes a necessity
Take it
when
2 hours. I mean,
Yeah, it becomes a necessity when that is dragging your focus far away from the task at hand.
That's it.
And so
and
that's
it can get
what you need to do.
outright painful.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Cause damage, everything. So live questions. I wonder how many of them are now, or how many of the comments are just about peeing. But let's go into Gavin's question. This is possibly one we have to do some more research into. We'll see. But he says, you've talked in the past about cycling increasing cortisol levels. I've heard that walking can reduce cortisol levels. Is it a good idea to go for walks on rest days? Do recovery rides do the same thing?
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I don't know why physical activity would reduce
stress. Cortisol levels can change very quickly.
It's not just
maybe.
like one thing influences it.
That's why testing it's kind of tough because it changes so much throughout the day.
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe, by extension, really anything that is relaxing or calming can
Lower cortisol.
have the effect he's looking for here, yeah.
It's not necessarily cycling versus walking too. It's not like the motion of cycling increases cortisol. We're talking about the exercise that you're doing and the strain and everything else. So it could be, I don't know, very intense knitting, whatever it is, right? We're talking about activity is the point here. So not necessarily on the other way. Let's go into Cameron's question. It says, I'm halfway through Sweet Spot Base 2, and I'm building towards my seasons next year. Great results so far, but what should I follow this up with? Continue to alternate Sweet Spot Base 1 out of 2, basically just bouncing between them until I get closer to racing. So there's a number of different ways to go about this, and it really depends on how much. You said building towards your season next year. Depends on when your season starts. But I think it doesn't make sense always just to stay in base. And if you have enough time, it can be beneficial to jump into a build phase and try something different.
You just went through this logic, so with Brandon, do you know the top of your head what the logic is that we're going to put in our special thing?
Off the top of my head,
Teaser.
Yeah, I think we almost push towards build, or push them to build, and then hold off at specialty, depending. Yeah,
I forget exactly.
I can't remember exactly.
But basically,
has been worked out.
You can go into build afterwards, and then bounce back to sweet spot.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to specialize. In fact, specialty really, outside of that logic, specialty is really just something to kind of dress up, keep you interested in training if you don't have a particular goal.
Yeah.
If you don't have a goal, right? Exactly. Otherwise, it's to fine tune you for that goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we get these sort of questions a lot in terms of what should I do if I have extra time? And don't be afraid of jumping into like a build plan. You can even jump into a handful of weeks of it, right? And then you can jump back or jump wherever you need to. That's kind of the fun part is you can experiment with it. You just want to make sure that you aren't making too drastic of a jump, like change from low to high volume or something like that. And if it's unfamiliar training for you as well, then take that into consideration that you might not just want to go in hog wild into something like that. Steven has a saddle sore question. He says, love the podcast nap. I'm in the 3rd week of base, mid volume 1, and I've started to develop sit bone pain on my left side. What recommendations do you have for recovery and saddle choice? So I want to differentiate between discomfort or actually chafing and a saddle sore, because that's like two. You can become saddle sore and develop a saddle sore, but it's probably more clear to call it chafing and then a saddle sore.
Just a raw spot.
So it's easy to. I think probably every person listening to this has probably dealt with both sides of that coin. And as you ride more, chafing will become less of an issue as long as you're using good equipment, that sort of stuff. Your skin gets tougher. That's how it works. So that's common to see. But that said, if you're experiencing chafing in some degree, maybe because your chamois isn't fitting or your shorts aren't fitting you properly, that's pretty common. And as a result, or they're old and worn out.
Yep. And I'm a little concerned that this is only happening on one side of the body, that it's not symmetrical. So that could be a postural issue. That could be a pedal cleat issue. I mean, it could be a fit issue. Let's put it that way.
Totally.
Could be something to do with the clothing. Could be something to do with the saddle itself. Maybe the saddle's canted. I would definitely
Saddles
look
do
over
wear out.
all your equipment. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially even one of Pete's saddles I borrowed, I was like, holy cow, this thing's bent. And I said, Pete, have you ever crashed? And he said, no. So it must have just been from when Pete hit a pothole really hard, right? Or something like that in a crit and was pedaling through and being really heavy on it.
I've actually installed the saddle slightly askew, didn't even realize it, but got about an hour into a ride and knew something was up. So it didn't get very far, but that was the cause in that case.
Yeah.
I have a correlation between when I don't use chamois cream, I get saddle sores, and then versus I do. And I like the Dave Zavrinsky's. It's called DZ Nuts. Yeah,
I've got a better one for you.
better one.
Yeah, it's
I
changed
just bought
everything.
like a whole bunch of things.
No, it's changed. So it's Squirt, the same people who make the chain lube. They make the best chamois cream ever. So I'm not a big chamois cream guy, but this year when I was doing like higher volume going through that whole thing, this is like you genuinely, it's like a tub that you get, a small one, really menthol-y. But you basically, and so a lot of chamois cream, it'll say like you put this on the skin or you put this on the chamois or you do both. And this is just supposed to be put on your skin. Okay. But seriously, like you take your finger and you just like make a small dab into it and that's enough. Like you don't need a lot.
Barrier balm?
Yes. Let me see. Yep, that's it. Yeah, Squirt Barrier Balm. Producer Tucker is going to throw it in. It's really good. And the best part about it too is if you're riding in wet conditions, a lot of the time if you're using a traditional chamois cream in wet conditions, it becomes less effective, right? If everything is soaked, and this stuff is amazing with that.
If anyone from Squirt is listening, please put this in a tube because the tubs, what they do is when you put your finger in there every time, there's bacteria, and you don't want to, like this is a big thing with like skincare stuff. You don't like get a pump or something like that or a tube so that when you're doing it, because you don't want bacteria down there.
Yep, it'd be much better.
Make sure you clean your hands, wash your hands before you apply this, and then obviously after.
Or you could scoop it out with something, put it on your hands.
Yeah, something like that, a spoon. That'd be great.
It's also really easy to, when it's in a squirt bottle, it's really easy to kind of like mix it up because a lot of chamois creams, like this one can separate and settle. So that makes it would be much better. But that's been like a really good one for me. It's been helpful. And I only use chamois cream on really long days or inclement weather days. Like if it's raining, that sort of stuff. Because then if your chamois gets saturated, it can cause a whole bunch of issues. So the one thing I would say on the chamois cream side of things is don't use that as a Band-Aid. If the problem just continues to persist forever, then and I'm not talking about like developing a saddle sore, but if you're getting raw and like and pain and you're only getting it on one side like this, and it continues to happen for a long time, chances are there's a bigger problem you need to solve than just having chamois cream.
Yeah, I'd first address that asymmetry before I worried about anything else.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, I would agree. Okay, so next one is from Santa Cruz. It says, I've been cycling, mountain biking for a year now. My FTP is currently 230 at 70 kilograms, 180 centimeters. Is it possible to guess performance potential based on this, and how much will structured training help going further?
With our current technology, no.
Right. It's just too tough. And a lot of people, they want to know that first.
I want to know too.
They want to work. Don't we all? Right?
Don't we all?
We all want that number.
Sell that.
Yeah, right. It'd be amazing. But in this case, no, there's no way for you to figure out what it could be. And it's also really surprising because you'll see a lot of riders like Chad, I bet, can perform. Let's just put 230 watts. I bet Chad at 230 watts versus some other riders at 200, like an average rider at 230 watts, Chad would outperform still. Just because experience and everything else adds on and really helps you.
It's not solely about power ever.
You figure out, in terms of racing and results, you can figure out a lot of other stuff. We do have a specific quick clip on this, though. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll get short, bite-sized conversations from this podcast or race analysis videos, that sort of stuff. So you should totally subscribe. Go to YouTube and do that. And producer Tucker will put the link to this one in the forum right now, episode 233, so you can see that.
Good one for you, Jonathan. When to upgrade mountain bike categories? How would you judge upgrading in mountain bike where categories are voluntary? So pretty much I could ask to be a Cat 1 and they're going to upgrade me, right?
Yep.
Been a pointy end for a couple of years, but only one win. Should I move to expert if my watt per kg improves? This is from John.
So pointy end of sport for a couple of years, but only one win. So there's two different things. We've talked about this before. There's learning how to win, and then there's learning how to race and everything else that comes with it. And racing to win is different than just racing, period. So, and granted, learning how to win changes. And in mountain biking, I think that it's learning how to win in Cat 2 or sport doesn't necessarily transfer up to Cat 1. So I think this decouples with road a bit. Yeah. Whereas I think if you, on road, once you get into Cat 3, the principles start to become pretty aligned in terms of what you will encounter at P1, 2. It's just you're going to encounter, it's going to be way harder, teams, that sort of stuff. But with mountain biking, I feel like the people that win sport usually are just faster. So they just ride away, kind of like what we were talking about earlier.
It's a solo win, usually. Mm-hmm. Isn't mountain biking usually solo wins?
Yeah.
Like gap. It's not like it's a 5-person sprint finish.
Yeah. It's not until you get, and also it's not wildly tactical until you get to the pointy end of like the national level of competition as an amateur or a pro. And then at that point, it's truly tactical. Like, a friend of the podcast, Keegan Swenson, and Sofia Gomez Villafane, they know what their competitors are bad or good at. So they'll place attacks in specific areas, and then they'll think, okay, and then on the next lap, we have to do it in this spot, and then it's going to change to this spot. So they're like very strategic about how they're doing it. We all wish we had the luxury of being able to choose how we could dole out the pain in a race, because many times we're just, the nail, not the hammer. But I think upgrading mountain bike category, go to 1. If you've been at the pointy end for a couple years, it's time to go up. And you're just going to have stronger competition that's going to make you a better rider.
And a lot of times too, in my experience, actually, I have been at the pointy end for the lower levels, but in the middle too, you can be in a group, you can be racing people in the middle of it, and it's just like you would be racing at the front end, right? There's like 4 people that triathlons and gravel races do that you're actually racing against. The people who are really good are like 20 minutes ahead of you.
Yeah.
So you can still have like tactical situations and stuff, and when should I attack this person if you're in the middle of the group. And also the nice thing is usually the upper categories go longer. So if you want more volume, or like you're driving to a race, you're like, I get an extra lap if I do this. Why not, right? Get more fun.
Totally.
If you want a longer race.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I would just upgrade. And upgrades for mountain biking, it's like points and whose line is it anyway? Just take it.
So what's
made up? Nobody cares.
What do you think I should race?
I think you should race Cat 1.
Sea Otter this year, Cat 1 for me.
Yep, I think you should.
Is there a 35 plus?
Yeah, there is. I think so. Yeah, I think you should.
Those guys are fast.
They're very fast. But I think you should be there because your power puts you there for sure. And then I think that your bike handling has improved a ton.
Yeah.
You haven't raced since then, since this summer of doing the training at North Star that you did. And I think that you're going to find yourself, sure, there will be faster people on descents, but I think you're really going to be competitive.
Cool.
There.
Fun stuff.
So, yeah. Okay. Next one from JB says, I've recently read some research that says training FTP is better for crits than crit specific intervals because it increases your max sprint power, repeatability, and less fatiguing. Is there any truth to this? This is like a classic example of us thinking that there's one way to be successful at a thing, and we just need to find that one way.
You need both, right, Chad?
100%.
Yeah, I think probably the most versatile type of riding is criterium riding. You have to be able to do pretty much everything.
You really do.
Yeah, in terms of road.
Yep.
So you can skin the cat a number of different ways. You just figure out which limits your performance the most, which race strategies you like to employ, maybe which you want to try employing that haven't worked for you yet, and shape accordingly.
Yep.
But you can go so many different ways.
If you follow,
but you do have to have a bit of all of it.
For sure. And if you follow our plans, you will get a bit of all of it, and it's going to prepare you for that. And I think that's the thing. I think a lot of people, when they don't have a structured plan, they are just hunting for like one thing to do. And many times I see a lot of people say I'm a crit racer. So I love crits too. Okay. So don't hate me, crit racers, for this. But a lot of the time you'll say, I'm a crit racer. And steady state work is hard. That's something that a lot of people don't want to talk about, but it is really hard. And especially
He's talking about Pete right now.
I don't know. But as a result, what you end up doing is you end up neglecting that. And then you just end up building repeatability with a lower FTP, right? And like that only gets you so far. And it basically gets into a point where if the breakaway is just carrying too high of a pace, then your valleys in between your poles are just going to be too high.
It's a smaller quiver.
It's gonna be too tough.
You've effectively pigeonholed yourself. You only leave yourself so many options for strategy.
Yep, exactly right. So that's why having a structured plan that's designed for criterium racing is so important, because it will top off all the different tanks that need to be topped off.
You can win a criterium in so many different manners.
It's pretty sweet.
I feel like a good, strong FTP makes it so, one, you don't get dropped, and two, you can survive in the breakaway. And if it's a strong, surgy race and you're good at like floating through, you don't need to do these huge efforts to put up. A high FTP will make you more fresh for the end. But the short, either the sprint or the short power, that is what wins races.
Yes.
And if you have a high FTP, maybe you can do a one-lap flyer or something. That's usually a function between, I guess sometimes if the race is really hard, everyone's tired, but they kind of let you go a little bit, and then you get away. So it's like FTP, I feel like, gets you in the position for the last lap in order to then put out the max power.
Right.
And if it's an easy race and it's really slow, high FTP doesn't matter, and you can just sit in, and then you need max power.
Yep.
Or if it's a really hard race and it's really tiring, a high FTP is going to get you fresher, so you don't have to put out as much power at the end. But they're, like you guys said, it's hand in hand. Don't say that.
It's one or the other.
You need both,
and being reasonably good at all things, having a wide range of capabilities makes it so much more fun. You can do so many more things.
Yeah, you can do more races too, because that's a lot of the time you build yourself into a narrow, like basically like a single profile rider. So then the amount of races that you can be successful at are just cut down by so much. And that's also why criteriums are kind of fun, is because they vary so much in terms of like profile. And so like there are some races where it's just pan flat and you really don't have to slow down for turns, right? So in that case, a rider with more like strength on steady state, or you could just exploit that tactic, right? It may not be a strength, you can exploit it. Exactly. Versus something that's climby. So it's pretty cool. Brian, he was the one that had the question earlier. He says, racing while looking at power numbers, or should I just learn, or he says, should I race while looking at my power numbers, or learn to race without the data and use the data for after?
We're talking about road racing. This is Brian, who wanted to do other stuff.
Triathlete going to road.
TT, look at the power.
Yeah. There are certain situations where it makes sense. Mostly no, though.
Yeah, breakaways.
Mass start racing, you kind of got to do what's put upon you by the other racers. There are situations that we've talked about before where you'll find yourself in a maybe a 3 or 4 man break, and you recognize that the power they're putting out is not something you're going to be able to sustain. This is not a workable situation for you, so you may call off the hunt. If you take off on a solo flyer, using power is absolutely beneficial.
Long one.
Yeah, especially
If it's short, usually just go.
just go.
Yeah. So there are instances, but for the most part, you're. If it's a highly competitive race, you're not going to be able to look at it. But if you have the luxury, there's not a lot of utility in knowing particular breakdowns of, that I went this hard for this long. That's not going to shape your strategy.
And you can't ask people to slow down. You can't be like,
You
guys.
sure can.
This is true.
You can ask
I got to pee, guys.
You can't ask.
Let's pull over.
This is above my threshold, guys. This is not sustainable. Yeah.
Brian, so if you're in a race, the only time you can look at your power meter is if you're clearly on the front or by yourself. Never look at it in the middle of the pack.
Yeah.
That's like a guaranteed way to crash.
I don't even like doing it when you're on the front. I think if you want to look at it, you look at it when you're dead last.
You're in a 4-person breakaway and you're pulling, and your pull's like 30 seconds.
Sure.
And you're kind of like maintaining something smooth. There's not hectic. No one's coming by you. Or I did it in the Snelling Road race. It's how to bridge to a breakaway, the video. It was a 16-minute bridge or 15-minute bridge.
Yeah.
I paced that bridge.
So painful.
I did 360 for 16 minutes in the middle of a road race.
Oh,
that was like my peak power output. That was pretty good.
Yeah. That's pain.
I was pain, but
That's extreme pain.
The only reason why it worked was because looking up the road, I kept seeing groups of people and thinking that I only had like 3 more minutes because I would see like oh, there they are, they're right there, and it wouldn't be them, it would be another rider.
They're like lappers. They're like your
people.
back
It was people that were falling off the P12 race or from that breakaway.
So you couldn't even use them.
Just people out for
they were going slow, so I'd come by them, but
it wasn't like someone waiting up for you so that you guys could tag team for a while.
I think I yelled at one
out
person.
For a Sunday ride.
Yeah, but it just shows though the psychology.
Oh, yeah.
When if you would have said, Nate, you should do this, I couldn't have done it. But by thinking,
it's just one carrot after the other.
And I'm like, well, okay, this is it. But they're just right up there. They're just right up there and doing it over and over and over again. It's crazy, right? Like,
oh yeah,
power, huge
it's just
power.
like thinking coming around a curve to that last hill.
That's the last one.
That's got to be the last one. I've done this ride 5 times. That's the last one. It's not.
It's not. It's never the last one, actually.
Anyways, Brian, don't look at your power meter in the middle of a race.
Totally.
If you're by anybody.
Yeah, there are situations where it's absolutely useful.
Yep.
Yeah, one of those situations which you should tune in, Brian, to tomorrow's video. That'll be on Friday, November 22nd, 2019. Jeez, I'm already thinking ahead. 2019. That video will be on the breakaway stuff, and we talk about that. And we had a situation where we were dealing with very gusty winds in different portions of the course. And this is where if you don't have... And you'll get to a point where you start to get like a very calibrated, tied-in feel, and you'll kind of know what power is. But racing always kind of skews that perspective. But anytime you go into a section where you're dealing with wind, that's where looking at your power can be really helpful, because you may find that you're going too easy when it's not windy, or you may find that you're going too hard when it's windy, and that's or not hard enough, whatever it may be. So that's a good way to look at it. Okay, last one. This one's from Simon. He says, how to best maintain strength and be able to prioritize other things like other strength areas, but also endurance work when I've reached your benchmarks of where a cyclist could or should be. So this is
strength
specifically.
Training.
So we're talking about, if you go onto blog.trainerroad.com, you can look up what we basically have is basically like strength recommendations. In other words, road cyclists should be able to do these exercises at this number of reps or something like that. And then it's basically just like a minimum level where we feel personally, we just feel like they should be able to do this because we've all seen bird bones break in the tour when they just fall over and they snap. And also plenty of people that develop injuries because they aren't strong enough to hold themselves on the bike as they need to, something like that. Mm-hmm. So basic strength training. So his question with that is how to maintain the strengths while working on the weaknesses. So he may be deficient in one of those categories while fine in the others, perhaps, is what he's talking about there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of just maintaining strength, it takes very little.
Mm-hmm.
Much like most things, maintenance is the easy part. And with strength or gym-specific strength training, if you can get in there once a week, that's typically enough for maintenance. It does not take a whole lot, and those workouts don't have to be anywhere near bordering on high volume either. Mm-hmm. You can do a single set of an exercise, call it good, potentially for the week. If you want to get in there twice a week because for whatever reason it folds into your training routine well enough, feel free, but I'm not entirely sure it's necessary, especially from the perspective of an endurance athlete who really doesn't have to maintain any high level of strength, simply has to maintain a sufficient level.
I struggle with this because whenever I start lifting weights, I always want to get bigger and bigger and stronger. But what my plan is once I get to a level of strength is just do those sets and rep ranges once or twice a week.
Maintenance.
It's way easier on the body.
If you did it this week and you can do it next week, you're obviously maintaining. So whatever you did is sufficient.
Yeah. And then I think the longer you do that, the less like extra fatigue it adds to your body. So like the less it takes away from cycling. So once you get to that strength level, and as long as you continue on it and you're not losing weight or something, it gets to be very, very manageable and maintainable.
For sure. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. You can do so, of course, on whichever podcast app you're using, but also on YouTube. It's Thursdays at 8 a.m. Pacific. If you share this podcast, it means the world to us. It helps us out a ton here at Trainer Road. And, of course, the biggest thing, if you want to get faster, sign up for Trainer Road. We promise it works. We put all of our effort and everything we do into making sure it works. So give it a shot, get faster. And we'll talk to you all. We'll be a day earlier next week because it's a holiday here in the United States. So we will be on next Wednesday, and it'll be at 8 a.m. Pacific. So we'll see you all then. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.